UNESCO and the UNESCO Cluster Office here in Jamaica. Let me welcome our distinguished guests. And first, let me also say we are all distinguished, but in terms of our protocol, I want to welcome the Honorable Minister, Olivia Grange, Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, the Director General of UNESCO, Her Excellency, Audrey Azoulay. We also have our State Minister in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, the Honorable Alanda Terrelong. We have Ms. Sadia Sanchez Vegas, who is the Director and Representative of the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean here in Kingston. I welcome our speakers, Commissioner Margaret Macaulay, Dr. Jermaine Omar McAlpin, Mrs. Barbara Blake Hanna, Professor Sir Godfrey Palmer, Professor Earl Taylor, Ms. Natasha Harrison, who is also a host. Of course, also our members of the National Council on Reparations. I'm not sure if we have any members of the Caribbean Reparations Council. Welcome. And I want to welcome all of you who have taken your Sunday afternoons off to join us in this very important discussion. So what's different about our discussion this afternoon? We really want to focus on the defamation of a race of people. So the theory is that the Black race, peoples of African descent, have been defamed as a race of people. And so everything that we do, or all the other institutions that have resulted in racial discrimination, is as a result of this defamation. So the discourses this afternoon will be not just informative, but perhaps a little eclectic in terms of the different paths that they will take. And the objective, of course, is not necessarily to arrive at any conclusion today. So before I introduce the speakers, I just want to put forward a few propositions and thoughts. 18th century political and intellectual leaders began publicly to assert that Africans were naturally inferior and that they were indeed best suited for slavery. The physical differences at the time of Blacks and Indians became the symbols or markers of their status. It was during this time that race became widely used to denote the ranking and inequality of these peoples. In other words, their placement in the chain of being. This perception, in my view, is born out of the nature and the implications of defamation. So even though this is not a law seminar, let me just briefly indicate some of the elements of defamation. False statement purporting to be a fact, publication or communication of that statement to third parties, fault amounting to at least negligence in terms of the spoken word or the written word, and damages or some harm caused to the persons, in this case, a race of people who have been the subject of the statement. Of course, according to the law, the word spoken must be with malice, and the originator must be negligent with knowledge that it was false or reckless, and would have had disregard to whether it was false or not. Now, in terms of group defamation, I would want to posit that the jury is still out on that one in terms of whether or not a race of people, for example, persons of African descent, can successfully mount a claim in terms of race defamation. And however, I'm hoping that our discourses this afternoon and future discourses will lead towards a conclusion that there is such a claim. So generally speaking, racial defamation occurs when the speaker's intention or the perceived effect of his speech is to cast ridicule or contempt upon a racial group. And we know that that occurs in terms of peoples of African descent today. In adhering to the balancing act between freedom of speech and the protection of reputation, the constitutionality of laws prescribing group defamation by a race or ethnic group hinges on the response of courts to some fundamental questions. And courts have actually articulated these issues. And as I said, in my view and my research, the jury is perhaps still out on that one. So what is my proposition? These discussions today are not meant necessarily to arrive at a conclusion, but to explore the many facets of this horrible thing called racism, which is founded stoutly on the notion that an entire race of people are inferior. This is certainly not a statement of fact, and in my view, a biologically and aesthetically baseless allegation made recklessly with a view to ensuring the superior lift of one race of persons over the other, and which has transcended centuries, bolstered by systems, laws, and institutions developed to ensure the perpetuation of the slander and the libel. This is race defamation. Throughout world history, racism and the perception of racial superiority and inferiority have fostered occasion for strife, violence, and misunderstandings. In its institutionalized form, racism fueled the transatlantic trade, giving rise to ideas that Blacks were more suitable for hard work, difficult terrain, we had higher threshold for pain, etc., and the list goes on. I want to move on quickly to an assertion that racial stereotyping was magnified by the Haitian Revolution in 1791. This heightened the American fear of slave revolts and retaliation, causing greater restrictions and even harsher and more degrading treatment. Grotesque descriptions of the low status of races, especially of Blacks and Indians, were widely publicized, and they helped to foster fear and loathing. And we know that this negative perception persists today. I also want to draw our attention to the book, Black Image in the White Mind, Media and Race in America, where authors Entman and Rojecki posit that white Americans learn about African Americans, not through personal relationships, but through images the media show them. And the book examines how television news, for example, focuses on Black poverty and crime out of proportion to the material reality of Black lives. Also in the book, Black Women Anti-Defamation Coalition, there's a proposal for remediation of the negative controlling images of Black women. The author argues that Black women are unable to control and craft their own reputation, and that this should be categorized as a human rights violation and enforced on the grounds of defamation law. We could go on. Amy Shisher, in Discourses on Colonialism in 1955, opined, a nation which colonizes a civilization, which justifies colonization and therefore force, is already a sick civilization, a civilization that is morally diseased, irresistibly progressing from one consequence to another, one repudiation to another. Cause for its Hitler, and in the person says, I mean its punishment. And it says the colonial relationship is based on race. By equating racism, barbarism, and colonialism, he claims that colonization is a form of dehumanization that results from Europe's racism against Black populations in Africa and the Caribbean. I'm going to stop there, and from time to time, I will interject different concepts as we proceed with this very important dialogue. And I want to leave with you an image. Let's imagine that the soil that we see every day and that we plant in, that soil is tainted with defamatory statements. And everybody has to toil in that soil. It simply means that whatever you put in there is actually going to have a resounding effect. And that effect is going to be these persistence that are based on defamatory statements and images will always persist. And this is my view, that we need to find a solution, because we know that our objective is towards reparatory justice, but we may ask the colonizers and demand reparatory justice in various forms. And that's why the apology is very important. And if we look at the CARICOM 10-point plan, the apology is the first item in that agenda, because an apology recognizes many things. First and foremost, that the actions of the perpetrator, those actions are wrong, they are baseless, they have no legal force, and therefore everything that emanates from that is also false. And that's why an apology is so very important. And I'm going to leave those thoughts with you and welcome at this point a message from the Director General of UNESCO, Her Excellency Audrey Azoulay, and those greetings will be read by Sandia Sanchez Vegas, and she will also bring her own message subsequently. And I hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. The Honorable Olivia Grange, Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports, and Chairperson of the Jamaica National Commission for UNESCO, Ms. Lalita Davis Mattis, Chair of the National Council of Reparations, Commissioner Margaret May Macaulay, Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, Dr. Jarimain Omar McAlpin, Assistant Professor, Chair of African and African American Studies, Ms. Barbara Blake-Hanna, Cultural Liaison Officer, Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports, Professor Sir Godfrey Palmer, Jamaica's Honorary Consul Scotland, Professor Earl Taylor, Jamaica's Honorary Consul, Namibia, Ms. Natisha Bojahardin, Attorney at Law. Message from Ms. Audrey Azoulay, Director General of UNESCO, on the occasion of the World Day for African and Afro-Descendant Culture, 24th January 2021. With this year's World Day for African and Afro-Descendant Culture, UNESCO wishes to honor and highlight such cultures in their diversity and actuality. From the stone town of Zanzibar to candombe drums, to mention only what is on the tangible and intangible heritage lists, the cultures of Africa and its diaspora have developed unique ways of thinking and feeling, experiencing and telling across continents and centuries. Endlessly revisited, reinvented, reinterpreted, this heritage fosters a particularly lively type of cultural creativity, typified, for example, by the organ music industry of Haiti and the flourishing cinema industry of Nigeria. Across the world, there are concerts, performances, and screenings allowing you to discover and explore these cultures and their countless riches, which will both amaze and inspire, but also pay tribute to the work of all of the creative artists and workers who maintain and rejuvenate these cultures. At a time when they are experiencing huge problems owing to the pandemic and the resultant far-reaching crisis in the cultural sector, it is more vital than ever to have their voices heard. This is not just an economic concern, since some very promising areas of development depend on these artists, but also an anthropological issue, as it would be terrible if the social and economic crisis were to reduce them to silence. This will cut off a whole area of human culture and denying us the means of weathering the crisis. For if we are to build back better and differently, we will need the inspirational power of culture. This is the challenge of the Global Resilience debate launched by UNESCO, which has been a great success in Africa, the Caribbean, and Central and South America, where Afro-descendant cultures are particularly significant. Promotion of African and Afro-descendant culture is all the more important as the global crisis has exacerbated all of the tensions in our societies. The fact is that these cultures offer pride, answers, and something to heal even the deepest wounds. This is the focus of the San Jose office, for example, which is working closely with schools and museums to show the importance of Afro-descendant cultures in the region's history and identity. It is also the concern of our slave route programs, which provide an understanding of the causes and consequences of slavery and shed light on the mechanisms of racism and stigmatization. As we begin 2021, which African heads of state have declared the Year of the Arts, Culture, and Heritage, this World Day is therefore an opportunity to promote these African and Afro-descendant cultures in order to enable them to play their full part in development and peace. This is the end of Madame Azoulaide's speech for today. Allow me, please, to say a few words to you. Dear Jamaicans, in its Article 1st, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. This brotherhood and sisterhood thrives by fostering a culture of peace and nonviolence through the promotion of inclusion, cultural pluralism, intercultural dialogue, tolerance, and diversity in order to strengthen solidarity among cultures, ethnicities, nations, and people. That is why we are gathered today to celebrate the World Day for African and Afro-descendant culture under the theme People of African Descent, Defamation, Race, Relations, and Development Institutions. It is important to highlight that we are also in the International Decade for People of African Descent, 2015-2024, which was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in December 2014 under the theme Recognition, Equity, and Development. This decade provides an operational framework to encourage states to address social injustices inherited from history and to combat racism, prejudice, and racial discrimination that people of African descent still face. This World Day reminds us that the fight against racism, discrimination, and stereotype against Afro-descendant people is not over. Last year, all of us, the entire world, witnessed the brutal consequences of cruel racism, deeply ingrained bigotry, prejudice, social injustice, and political violence. In some, a flagrant violation of human rights and of human dignity that led to the death of George Perry Floyd Jr. and 26-year-old Breonna Taylor, and many others that we do not even know throughout history. The first African slave arrived in Jamaica in 1655, and over 1 million Africans arrived in the country by the time the transatlantic slave trade was abolished in 1809. The African people brought with them their religions, spiritual and cultural expressions, and identity. Because of that, this day reminds us the vitality and deep influence of the African heritage. Celebrating the culture and the African diaspora is celebrating the Americas and the social, economic, and cultural footprint that the African people left behind in our continent. The African diaspora is with us every day in our identity, experiences for living, and even in our mood. Many cultural expressions still stem from the remnants of African culture. Today, Jamaica counts with a rich diversity of ethnicities and cultures under the motto, out of many, one people. Allow me to repeat what the Director General Audrey Azoulade says in her statement. This heritage is constantly being revisited, reinvented, and interpreted, fostering private cultural creativity, strengthening social fabric, and promoting innovation for sustainable development. The substance of Africanness made Jamaica the epicenter of musical expression that has reached and connected the entire world. The globally known and celebrated music of reggae, which was added to UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage List of Humanity in 2010, extinct would not exist. With its African influence, reggae serves today as one of the best known messages against injustice, for resistance, and for peace, love, and freedom. We can see other examples in the Maroon communities in Jamaica with their dances, songs, and drums. They are a living symbol of the cultural heritage still practiced today, derived from their African ancestor, which is why they were included in UNESCO representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity in 2008. With all this in mind, UNESCO continues to reaffirm its commitment to ending racism, racial discrimination, injustice, most importantly, to prevent repetition. With the Slave Route Project, Resistance, Freedom, Heritage, UNESCO broke the silence on the slave trade and slavery that affected every continent and caused the great upheavals that have changed our modern societies. Furthermore, for over 50 years, UNESCO has led the General History of Africa initiative, an ambitious undertaking consisting of reconstructing African history, freeing it from racial prejudices, exuding from slave trade and colonization, and highlighting the contribution of African cultures to the progress of humanity. We must recognize that racism continues to proliferate in our societies despite the remarkable progress made towards dispelling racial needs and the development of univocal legal frameworks. In this regard, UNESCO continues to reaffirm its commitment in the pursuit of ending racial discrimination and injustice. With the regional consultation of racism and racial discriminations on December 10, 2020, UNESCO brought into the forelight issues of intersectional discriminations and exclusions in the Latin American and Caribbean region that have been reinforced and exacerbated in light of the COVID pandemic, disproportionately affecting the most vulnerable groups of our society. Based on this consultation that were held worldwide, UNESCO will then draft a roadmap on how to better address these issues through institutional and legal frameworks against racism and discrimination, affirmative actions in public and private sectors, and anti-bias trainings. The World Day for African and Afro-descendant culture commemorated today is a reminder that we must continue build on the power of culture and in the fight against racism, while remembering the history and eliminating all forms of discrimination and all forms of exclusion, leaving no one behind. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Director. And I must say, I actually forgot to introduce, and I'm going to do that right away. Sadia Sanchez was appointed Director and Representative of the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean in Kingston, Jamaica on September 1, 2020. Her regional mandate covers 20 countries and within the Caribbean region. Prior to this, she served as Director of the UNESCO Office in Quito and representative to Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Venezuela. Sadia is a sociologist with a degree from the University of Zulia in Venezuela, a master's degree in Library and Information Science from San Jose State University, USA, and a PhD in Information Science from the University of California at Berkeley, USA. As an experienced senior manager with more than 20 years of practice, she has had an extensive career in management, technical cooperation, and international relations.
All right.
There's a microphone that's on G6. Could you please move? Thank you. In her new assignment as Director of UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean, Ms. Sanchez is committed to exercising strategic and operational leadership to advocate for the Caribbean small island developing states as UNESCO's priority, to focus on the delivery of technical support under high standards and grounded on human rights, aligned with sub-regional and national priorities in the framework of the COVID-19 and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Thank you very much, Director.
Thank you.
I now welcome our Honorable Minister, Honorable Olivia Grange, who really needs no introduction, but I am going to introduce her. There are many things you perhaps don't know about her. Honorable Olivia Babsy Grange, as she's well known, was appointed Minister of Information, Youth, Sport and Culture with responsibility for women and gender affairs, entertainment, community development and special projects in 2007. She also served as Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister, 1985 to 1989, Government Senator and Parliamentary Secretary for Information and Culture from 1983 to 1985. In 2015, Minister was awarded the Order of Distinction in the rank of Commander class for her contribution to Jamaican music industry, cultural development, and public service. In June 2009, she had the distinction of being appointed the Caribbean Communities CARICOM First Champion of Culture, with responsibility for advocating, among other things, capacity building for cultural industries, cultural institutions, and individual artists. She's an artist, director, event planner, and an ardent supporter and promoter of Jamaica's creative and cultural industries. She's also a pioneer contributor to the development of the reggae and dancehall music industry in Jamaica, Canada, and the United States. Minister Grange has a long career as a community activist and politician, committed to the promotion of youth and women's affairs with a particular focus on job creation and improved healthcare. She's the proud mother of 1 daughter and 3 granddaughters, and she is the minister with responsibility for the National Council on Reparatory Justice. Minister Grange, over to you.
Thank you, Lolita. Hello, everyone. Are you hearing me okay? You're hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Okay. I just want to acknowledge the presence of Orlando Terrelong, our Honorable Minister of State, Madam Chair, Chair of the National Council on Reparations, Ms. Sanchez Vegas, the Director for the Cluster Office, UNESCO Cluster Office in Jamaica. Commissioner Macaulay, how are you? So good to see you. Dr. McAlpin, Professor Palmer, and Professor Taylor. Long time no see. Mrs. Blake Hanna, the first Rasta Senator in Parliament, I would say the first and only Orthodox Rasta Senator, former Senator. Welcome, Barbara. And of course, I always call Natasha Natty. So welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to see that you have been able to participate, and welcome to all those participants who are on board. I see we have about 100 persons on board here today. So today, January 24, we that have bolstered the ultimate restoration of the dignity and integrity of our culture and identity. In our case here in Jamaica, we not only wrested freedom from the oppressors, but also assumed the reins of self-government. At the end of it all, we succeeded in creating a culture that has been the recipient of global acclaim, with a brand known everywhere for its grandeur and power. Through the instrumentality of our many freedom fighters, such as Captain Kojo, Taki, Nani, Kwao, Sam Sharp, and others, including our modern governance history, the likes of Sir Alexander Bustamante and Norman Manley, again, among others. Jamaica has stood tall among global cultures and economies, charting new courses for Afro-descendant peoples and culture. As Jamaicans, we can be justly proud of our contribution to the strength, the power, the resilience of African and Afro-descendant culture, the emergence of African retention such as revivalism, kumina, mento, and in the popular idiom, cultural inventions such as reggae and dancehall serve to reinforce our connections to the land of our ancestry, Africa, the cradle of humanity. Through it all, we have strengthened Afro-descendant relationships. Through national hero and philosopher Marcus Messiah Garvey, we promoted Pan-Africanism and the right of people of African descent to be masters of our own destiny. We pronounced our unwillingness to die like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while round about us barked the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. Through artists like Edna Manley, who gave the world Negro Arouse, to intuitive artists such as Kappa, to other cultural creators like Olive Lowen, Rex Nettleford, Harry Belafonte, and so many other culture and arts luminaries, we have been able to buttress our image as a global cultural powerhouse. Amid all the challenges, and in response to our determination to return to the glories of our past African civilization, Leonard Howell and a new brand of warriors took the words of Garvey and dared to create a new religion for Afro-descendant people called Rastafari. So we have given the world a new religion. Rastafari glorified African and Afro-descendant culture and dared to extract out of Ethiopia a God figure that looked like the rest of us in Haile Selassie I Rastafari. Rastafari, or I should say Rastafari. Rastafari sought to position Africa and Afro-descendant culture at the center of modern Jamaica and Black culture. Through it all, Jamaica and Jamaicans have impacted global arts and liberation movements, including across the continent. We promoted equal rights, justice, and peace, and heralded by Bob Marley the globally unifying concept in one love. Yes, amid all these successes, our people are still the targets of negative stereotypes and vilification. Bolstered by persistent poverty, Afro-descendants have suffered from chronic health maladies and group defamation. Our economies are often in free fall as we try to rise out of poverty our people inherited from fleeing the plantation without compensation. We characteristically suffer from inadequate health and education solutions for our people, much of it as a result of systemic global racism. For this purpose, we established the National Council on Reparation within the Ministry of Culture, whose main task is to explore the avenues available for reparation for the damage to our people because of enslavement. In light of this, while we give due credit and respect to our ancestors, we struggled and gave their lives, who struggled and gave their lives so that we, their children, can have a better life. We're aware of our responsibility to reflect and defend their claims for reparation against former European colonizers. That is why on this World Day for African Afro-descendant culture, we challenge UNESCO, the flagship international agency for culture, to work even more closely with us as we seek to promote measures to address these inherent imbalances in our historic and current social and economic landscape. Racial discrimination, xenophobia, and racial intolerance, that reparations concern both our past and our present. The Durban Declaration clearly states that transatlantic slavery and colonialism remain among the root causes of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance against Africans and people of African descent. There needs to be the urgent project of providing reparations for slavery and colonialism requires states not only to fulfill remedial obligations resulting from specific historical wrongful acts, but also to transform contemporary structures of racial injustice, inequality, discrimination, and subordination that are the product of the centuries of racial machinery built through slavery and colonialism. Reparations for slavery and colonialism entail moral, economic, political, and legal responsibilities. A structural approach to providing reparations for slavery and colonialism under public international law and international human rights law, according to which states must pursue a just and equitable international order as an urgent dimension of reparations for slavery and colonialism. Full implementation of the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination must also be understood as a central pillar to achieving reparations for slavery and colonialism. We also advocate that the United Nations, having declared the International Decade for People of African Descent, goes even further by leveraging their global influence in creating instruments that will encourage states to develop actions and activities focused on reparatory justice, recognition, and development for African and Afro-descendant peoples. Further, we request of the UN systems assistance in engaging former European colonizers as we seek to remedy the offenses of the past and promote sustainable development and economic justice for people of African descent. Having a day designated for this reflection is a step in the right direction. Yet, it is only a step in a series of moves that must be engaged if we are to ensure that people of African descent receive the equal rights and justice they deserve on account of the injustices suffered in the past. Today, we salute the heroes of our people, those who unreservedly and selflessly gave of themselves to ensure that we, their children, would see a brighter day. While we are pleased to have attained our freedoms, it is still worth stating that freedoms that do not bring sustainable prosperity for our people cease to be so. The trappings of freedom require us to interrogate the systems of international diplomacy and trade in order to ensure equity in trade and commerce and sustainable development for people of African descent. The UN system is a system through which a lot has been done and through which a lot more can be done. As I end my remarks and say, God bless all of you, I just want to quote. I want to quote Kwame Nkrumah. Albeit an adaptation, we have awakened. We will not sleep. Young people will say we are woke. But from now on, we are new Africans in this world. Thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing all the other presentations. God bless.
Minister, thank you so much, as usual, for your very inspiring and insightful comment and for putting the discussion within the international political framework in the manner in which you have. And to recognize the role of the United Nations system, not just UNESCO, in this call for reparatory justice, and to reposition the role of Africans and persons of African descent in this global economy, and to recognize our contribution to sustainable development. Thank you very much. I'm now going to call on Commissioner Margaret May Macaulay. And in introducing her, she is a former judge of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and a current commissioner of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, with rapporteurship on the rights of women and the rights of persons of African descent and against racial discrimination. She serves the countries of Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, Canada, Dominica, El Salvador, the Dominican Republic, and St. Kitts and Nevis. She's a citizen of Jamaica and was first elected as commissioner on June the 16th, 2015, by the Organization of American States General Assembly. Marguerite holds a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of London. She served as mediator on the Supreme Court of Jamaica and as an associate arbitrator, in addition to serving as a notary public from 2007 to 2012. She served as a judge for the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, contributing to the formulation of the court's rules of procedure. And I now welcome you, Madam Commissioner, to make your presentation.
Thank you very, very much, Madam Chairperson. Forgive me if I just say greetings to everyone, brothers and sisters, as we are all together because of the shortness of time. But I do want to say thank you to the Honorable Minister for inviting me, however late it was. And I also have a further thanks for the Minister in that you have called on the United Nations and not on the Inter-American system to do anything about these matters, which is a bit disappointing, really, because we are the regional system and you should come to us first. So I hope in the future you will come to us, and I hope all those who are listening from the Caribbean and from Latin American countries will in fact bring their complaints to us. We have mechanisms to deal with them, and we are getting more and more active in the fight, and it is a fight, for the rights of Afro-descendants in the region. And remember, our region has the largest proportion of Afro-descendants population in the world. Outside of Africa, Black people are more plentiful in Latin America and North America. So we are a very important region for this matter. And if I can just touch on the commission for a bit, because this is part of the mandate that we have, is to say that, firstly, it is an honor for me to be a presenter with the notable members of the panel. And I am really happy that I was invited in this way, because it assists the work of the rapporteurship and of the commission in this regard. But I am fully aware, and we are in the commission fully aware, that not many people really know about the Inter-American system of human rights in the Caribbean. So I'll just give you a short synopsis on the commission to framework what we do. The Inter-American Commission is composed, is first of all, the primary organ of the Organization of American States. And from now I will say OAS because it's such a long name. For the promotion and protection of human rights in the entire Americas, from the tip of Canada and Alaska all the way down to Chile, covering the Caribbean as well. It's as a commission is made up of 7 independent commissioners, and it is autonomous in all its human rights actions and decisions. And I say this because we're not autonomous about our money. That is handled by the OAS. They don't think we're old enough to handle our own money, but we handle the human rights matters that we deal with, which is good. And there is a an Inter-American Court to which we send cases when we make recommendations to state parties which have violated the human rights of any of their citizens which have complained to us, and they either do not implement the recommendations or just implement some and not the important ones. And we can send the matter to the court to be tried. And when the court decides, it gives a judgment, and that judgment is binding on those parties which have accepted the jurisdiction of the court. And their judgments are effective and as strong as each national judgment of the respective state, because that's part of the acceptance of the court's jurisdiction, that you accept that, and that it will be executed in the same manner as you execute national judgments. So the Commission has various mechanisms to deal with matters. We receive complaints, and it is very informal. You can write a letter. You can send it through the website. You can send it by post. You can hand deliver it. And it represents the interests of individuals. So individuals can pursue petitions in the Commission, or groups of individuals which are identifiable. This is why, Madam Chair, for the Commission, definitely, the entire group of Afro-descendants cannot bring a matter for everyone, but several groups can bring, which are identifiable, to be dealt with. Anyway, we have since 2006, the Rapporteurship on the Rights of Afro-Descendants and Against Racism was established by the Commission, having at last awakened to the fact that Afro-descendants needed protection within the region. And this is how we deal directly with the problems of Afro-descendants and the violations of their rights. And it is a very difficult thing, actually, to deal with in such a large area, with some countries with massive numbers of Afro-descendants and other countries with relatively small numbers. For instance, Brazil, of course, has the largest number, and they are the majority of the population in Brazil. In Latin America, next to Brazil, is Colombia, which has upwards of between 10, because that's a problem. The census of Afro-descendants in lots of the Latin American countries is a matter of concern, because lots of them have not been counted in census. Censuses taken in these countries. And this is one of the problems that I tackled since I became the rapporteur in 2016. And I'm still working on, or we're still working on the matter. As I say, it's rather difficult because there are various stages and degrees of violations of the rights of Afro-descendants. We all know about the violence, the loss of life, the extrajudicial killings, and so on. That is true of every country. That is true of every country. And that, in fact, Afro women are the largest group of victims of violations of rights. In fact, taking Colombia, mentioning Colombia, during its 50 years of war, the Afro-descendant population in that country suffered the largest number of deaths from the guerrillas and the army, and injuries to their persons, and displacements from their residents. And some of the residents that were displaced from are tribal lands where they have been in occupation since slavery was abolished. but they were displaced at the drop of a hat. And lots of them are still trying to get back to their territorial and tribal lands. The same thing happens in Brazil, because Brazil is extraordinarily violent in relation to the Afro-descendant population. And just as we can say, the extrajudicial killings in the United States of America is horrendous. It is in Brazil. And in fact, the percentage of deaths in Brazil is about, for every killing, for all the killings of police officers, Afro-descendants make up 75% of them. Even though they're the majority of the population, their majority is only 56%. They're 56% of the population. But in deaths, they are 75% of those killed. So we have all that. As I said, the commission receives complaints. We receive complaints, we have meetings, we meet with groups of persons. Like when I travel around, I travel to countries, I meet Afro-descendant groups, women's groups, and so on, and they talk to us and tell us what challenges they are having, what violations they're suffering, and so on. And one of the violations which stands out, which affects their economic position, is the theft of intellectual property, of their intellectual property, of their artistic, traditional patterns, and so on, which most of them do not have any legal protection for. And this is one of the things we have been speaking to states about quite firmly, to say that they must do all in their power to assist them to protect their intellectual property. And in instances where they have evidence of theft of them, the states must take action in order to see that they are compensated for their such property and such patterns. In addition to that, we have received so much information about the fact that in South America, in the region, I should say, in the region, the suffering and the poverty level of the Africans was and is as a direct result of their denial of nationhood and personhood in their respective countries from the time of abolition of slavery and down to this present day. Because so many of us are still fighting for the recognition of being part of the human race. And let us accept as a fact, because we do in the commission, that every single violation of human rights is based on discrimination of one kind or the other. And racial discrimination and racism, both historic, institutional, and systemic, have throughout denied the humanity of the Afro-descendant peoples in this region. And forgetting the fact that it was through the loss of lives, the loss of blood, the injuries, the suffering of these people, these ancestors of the present-day Afro-descendants, where the infrastructure and development and building of riches in each of these countries, they were responsible for doing all the work related to that. And yet, at the abolition of slavery, the slave owners were compensated. But until today, the Afro-descendants who did all this work not from choice, have never been compensated in any way. Indeed, I do not know of any country, ex-colonial country, slave-owning country, which has admitted to any of the crimes they have committed against the Afro peoples. And several people are of the view that we cannot really move forward to a real acceptance of the fact that they consider Afro-descendants part and parcel and equal to them of enjoyment of the rights of all peoples, until there has been such an apology. So not an admission first and an apology. And I will say this, that when I was a judge in the courts, lots of the petitioners in the courts and victims would say to the court, when we would ask them at the end of their evidence and so on, we'd ask, is there anything you want to say? And they would say to the court, we want the state to admit that what they did to us was wrong. And they should say it publicly. So lots of the decisions of the court, a part of our reparation has been that the highest official of the state should make a public apology to the people whose rights the court found were violated. And secondly, that they might, sometimes we'll say they have to name a square in their town, a street, put up a plaque, and all this must be done publicly to make them aware that there is acknowledgement that they were wronged. And this is a substantial part of the reparation of the court. Of course, we give monetary compensation as well, material and immaterial, but this is a substantial part of it, because we believe that gives back to the victims who are there as petitioners a sense of dignity, which they ought to have. And this we do and have done in cases of Afro-descendants matters which have come before the courts. And most of them have dealt with their tribal lands, where the states have ignored and violated their right to information and to be consulted, and for them to consent to any extractive industry being started within their tribal lands, despite the fact that some of their lands were held through treaties made between the state and the peoples. And the present day state tends to wish to ignore these and just go ahead with developments willy-nilly. If I can also, because I want you, lots of people to realize what we do, is that mention some of our instruments very quickly, which affect the issue of Afro-descendants. And the first is the Charter of the Organization of American States. The second is the Declaration, the Inter-American Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Man. And I must, which was remind everyone that the Inter-American Declaration of Human Rights was the first international human rights document in the world, not the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the United Nations. That came 7.5 months after the Inter-American Declaration. So we are not spring chickens in this matter of human rights. So don't forget us, use us. Okay, so those are two first ones. Then we have the American Convention, which we call the Bible, because by the American Convention, you can recognize the court, the existence of the court. And once you have ratified the state has ratified the American conventions, it has all the powers to vote on any matter. Only 6 Caribbean countries have ratified this convention. It's the main convention of human rights. I mean, we have many others, the same, almost a repetition of UN conventions, some before, some after. And because only 6 members of the Caribbean have ratified this, they cannot vote for the election of judges to the Inter-American Court. This is why we've only had 3 Caribbean judges of the Inter-American Court. 2 men, one from Jamaica, one from Barbados, and myself. The only woman ever from the Caribbean. Because we need the mass of votes from the Caribbean, which they use for elections for commissioners. But they must ratify the American Convention in order to have full powers and authority for votes. And in that way, the Caribbean sub-region can come into its own power-wise in the organization. It is my firm belief, and not only mine. And so we are pushing for universality of the ratification of that convention. The 4th document I want to mention is the Inter-American Convention Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, and Related Forms of Intolerance. And that was adopted in 2013 and came into force in 2017. That 5 states have ratified it and 12 have signed. Now we still have a long way to go. I'm pushing as best as I can for ratification, and I hope Jamaica will soon ratify it. Minister, are you hearing? And then, and then we have the Inter-American, and I'll tell you why in a minute, the Inter-American Convention Against All Forms of Discrimination and Intolerance. That was also the same year, adopted in the same year, 2013, but it came into force in February 2020, last year. And it has only been ratified by 2 states, Uruguay and Mexico, and 12 states have signed it. Now, I am saying why these conventions should be ratified, even though you have already ratified the United Nations one many years ago. These conventions are much closer to today. They are more modern in interpretation and in dealing with the violations which can be committed in relation to racism and racial discrimination and discrimination of all kinds. And so therefore, in order for us to be effective, we should ratify also the Inter-American system by all states in the region in order to be as effective as we can, if we're serious about dealing with this matter. So I'm next going to go to some of the mechanisms. The rapporteurships, thematic rapporteurships are an important mechanism of the Commission, because through it, we can deal deeper with respective issues like Afro-descendants' rights and so on, making one commissioner responsible for it. Unfortunately, the funding is always difficult. So for instance, my rapporteurship on Afro-descendants, I only have 1 assistant, and who's a specialist in the area. And for women's rights, I also only have 1 assistant who's a specialist in the area. But you can imagine the area is so large, just the 2 of us, it's a lot of work. But I work closely with the rapporteurship on a special rapporteurship on freedom of expression. Oh, I should tell you, we have special rapporteurships and rapporteurships. Special rapporteurships are employees of the Commission. The commissioners are not, and we are just rapporteur commissioners. And Also, I worked closely in the rapporteurship with a new rapporteurship dealing with economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights, DESCA, which commenced about 2.5, 3 years ago. Because, of course, the situation of poverty and extreme poverty, which Afro-descendants were forced in, demonstrates that we must work closely and hand in hand. And because of the currency of hate speech in all forms of media in recent years, and especially against Afro-descendants and Afro-descendant women, we work closely with the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression. I should say, let me say at once so I do not forget this, is that we have in recent years been collaborating much closer with the United Nations system and its agencies in order for us to be far more effective in the results we achieve from our work in trying to promote and protect persons for their human rights. So we have mechanisms that we use. We have Article 41 letters, which we send to states, asking specific questions about why are you doing this? Why do we have information that this is happening? Why, tell us how many people have been affected by this, and so on and so forth. These are letters of inquiry. And then we have also the mechanism of press releases. We release a lot of press releases where we pinpoint what information we received is going on in a particular state which is violating the rights of peoples, and in what particular. And also Twitter. The commission is on Twitter, Instagram, all those social media things, which I don't know about much. And also, we publish thematic reports. And the thematic reports are deep studies of the particular issue. For instance, am I on time, or do I have any time left?
You're actually over. So if you just wrap up, Commissioner, you're actually over.
Yeah, I was going to ask, then I got bogged down. Okay, if I can just say this, that we have published several reports on, for instance, police violence against Afro-descendants in the Americas, and the situation of Afro-descendants not in the Americas, in the United States, and the situation of Afro-descendants in the Americas. And we're continuing to produce in-depth reports. But I just want to say this, that we no, let me close. I will wind up by saying something, because there may be questions. I will wind up by saying that we must use the opportunity. I must use this opportunity to call on everyone to continue living their lives as vocal supporters of all the things which matter, bearing in mind the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which is, and I quote, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Let us then speak out against all wrongs and violations, and thereby help to achieve the change which is long overdue for the general respect for the rights of all peoples, but most especially for Afro-descendants in our hemisphere, in the Americas." Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and for informing in a very substantive way the role of the Inter-American system and how it plays a role in our objectives towards reparatory justice. I think I can speak for the participants that many of us didn't know the breadth and the access and the real jurisdiction of the commission, actually, and the whether or not the decisions are binding or not. And as we pursue reparatory justice, it's very important for us to understand the many paths and the varied paths to achieving our objectives. And I think also your explanation of the nature of racial discrimination, even in South America, that many of us perhaps are not aware of the level of racism in those parts of the world. And the notion too that peoples of African descent are so scattered abroad. And the notion of coming together as one group of people to make a claim, which is basically the kind of research that we are conducting at this point. And thank you so much again. And so I want to introduce to us our next speaker, who is Dr. Jermaine Omar McAlpin, Assistant Professor of African and African American Studies, University City. He's an Assistant Professor of African and American Studies at New York, Jersey City University in the USA. To the present time, he is responsible for the development and execution of inventive instructional procedures in the African and African American Studies program. Prior to that, he was the Associate Director, Center for Caribbean Thought from 2009 to 2017, where he, among other things, established a partnership in a tripartite collaboration of the University of Cape Town, Brown University, and the University of the West Indies. That collaboration is to enhance understanding of the different experiences of knowledge concerning Africa, its history, legacies, and development. Transitional justice and political institutions in the Department of Government at the University of the West Indies from 2007 to 2016, and taught foundational courses in political science and African politics. McAlpin also serves as adjunct professor, African Studies in the Department of African Studies at the Brown University. And from 2006 to 2007, he has spent his professional life treating with the matter of reparatory justice and conflict management. He has focused on research on transitional justice and truth, commission reparations, genocides and human rights, mass media and politics, social justice, democracy and democratization, African political development. Dr. McAlpin is also well published across his various areas of interest. Dr. McAlpin, I welcome you to the stage. As I call your name, it sounds as if I'm actually calling a contestant.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good evening to everyone on the Zoom platform as well as those watching on YouTube. I want to greet all the plenipotentiaries on the call. In the interest of time, please pardon my lack of protocol by not calling by name, but I'm aware that we are hard-pressed for time. I would like to keep my remarks focused on the question of reparations and the importance of tying understandings of reparations to notions of freedom. And so my remarks today will center on understanding race, reparations, and freedom for Afro-descendant peoples here in the Americas. We know that civilization and humanity begins in Africa, and so when we start from that perspective, we begin to understand the importance of history in the current fight for reparations. One of my most profound proverbs that I've ever come across is from the Ewemina people in Benin and Togo in West Africa. And it says, until the lion gets his own storyteller, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. I believe authorship is important, and authorship speaks to ownership. You own your story. I think a significant part of the problem of Afro-descendant people is that we have inherited a story told by racism, and we continue to use the same language to tell the story. We believe the story is different because we are Black, and so we presume that nothing is wrong because Black people are telling the story. Well, where did we get the idea that anything too Black can good? Or where did we get the idea of the black sheep in the family? Or she looks good to be a Black girl, or equating ignorance with darkness? I offer to you that the fault in our stars is that we have not created our own light or our own path. I often think of the ways in which our foremothers and forefathers fought for emancipation, but I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but we are still not free. Freedom is more than a declaration politically of the end of colonial rule. Freedom is the economic, philosophical, religious, cultural, and historical ability to develop one's own vision. It is that which Marcus Garvey turns to when he says we must have emancipation from mental slavery. Indian born Nobel Prize winning economist Amartya Sen calls this development as freedom. He ties development to freedom by arguing that development is the process of expanding human freedoms and that freedom is living the life that we have reason to value. The question that must be asked is who gave us the values that we now express and we have legacies to our children? Who taught us to hate ourselves? And why do we hate ourselves? Every year, as February rolls around, I'm at pains to explain why Black History Month is still needed. We're often in a stupor of denial because, as a Black majority country or Black majority countries, we automatically assume an end to self hatred and disempowerment. Black History Month would not be necessary if racism, a global system of domination and oppression, did not persist. To be clear, while we have racial prejudices across races, racism is practiced by whites in a system that combines racial prejudice with power. That is, the ability to operate in a system that reproduces white privilege and non-white domination. I think of the concept of systemic racism, which is the complex array of anti-Black practices, the unjustly gained political and economic power of whites, and the continued economic and other resource inequalities of Blacks and other non-white peoples. Now, I might step on some toes by saying that our consumption of the dominant white culture is at an all-time high via Netflix, etc. We watch shows and series glorifying the Victorian and Elizabethan eras in England. We watch about Vikings and ancient Romans, but cultural shows concerning the struggle and triumph of Blacks appear too boring for our consumption. You see, reparations is not just about monetary compensation, it is in broader terms of repair and restoration, or what Professor Rex Nettleford calls smadification. We must first grant ourselves, as people of African descent, the dignity of repair, mental and cultural emancipation by linking ourselves to what Minister Grange calls an understanding of Africa that is far more storied than starting with slavery. We would have to go back millennia to understand the importance of who we are as Afro-descendant people. Africa continues to reel from the post-colonial trauma and the legacy of rape and colonial plunder. If you follow the articulation of history books such as the landmark edited volume by Professor Hilary Beckles and Professor Vereen Shepherd, we would realize that in 1834, the enslaved got emancipation without freedom. In 1962, we got independence without freedom. Emancipation is the political act of ending legal authority over enslaved Africans. Freedom is when a people can decide to direct their country from within without unsolicited interference. It is the economic, social, cultural, and philosophical ability to direct one's own life. Reparation must first be self-repair of our identity and our culture, our notion of self and our potential. Until we begin the process of repair, we will never truly understand as a people the need for our former colonial overlords to extend reparations, not just for the evils of slavery, but because of the uncompensated work done by our foreparents and that multiplied for centuries. When I define reparations as any measures that are taken to make amends when wrongs have been committed or injury done, and especially because these wrongs and injuries persist into the present. When I think of reparations, I actually think of 7 dimensions of reparations. The first is an apology, or the acknowledgement of harm, the wrong or the violation. Second, I think of commemoration and memorialization, the importance of cultural markers. I think third of monetary compensation. I think in our instance here in the Caribbean and in Jamaica, with the availability of crowned lands, I think of land restitution. Fifth, I think of historical reclamation. That is, we must begin to teach history from the lion's perspective rather than from the hunter's perspective. Sixth, death cancellation. And seventh, the return of treasures and artifacts. In effect, reparations is compensation for unjust enrichment multiplied across centuries. When you begin to understand this, we realize that reparations is not hush money or lazy money or charity or aid. We begin to see reparations both as a debt as well as justice. The Rastafari were culturally astute in articulating for repatriation, not just as a physical return, but as a cultural and ideational duty to return. Black Uhuru declared that the whole world is Africa, expressing the historical truth that life begins for the world in Africa. Then, therefore, any renaissance must draw from Africa, not to plunder her again, but to emancipate the world from its own enslavement. When we look in the US at Black-led movements for social justice, we in Jamaica often frown of its relevance to us. Well, again, I think we are lulled into sleep, into thinking that a Black majority means Black valuability. Black Lives Matter is really a global call against racism, thinking of it as a global system. African American thinker Ibrahim Kendi argues that it is not a matter of if Black people breathe their first breath in the Americas, it is that racism does not differentiate. When Black people make jokes that dehumanize other people of African descent, we allow the horror stories to live again in our laughs. Ethnic racism is the resurrected script of the slave trader. Kendi concludes, racist ideas we consume about others came from the same restaurant and the same cook who used the same ingredients to make us all the same degrading dishes. You see, there would be no point of the Black Power movement of the 1960s if there was somehow a historical rectification of the importance of Blacks. There would be no need to articulate Black Power. If you notice, the movements for white power is farcical because the global political system has been defined within the perspective of white supremacy and racism for the last 500 years. We cannot truly hope for reparations for enslavement until we can come to Black solidarity. Black solidarity is the unity that must emerge from the common ancestry, the common status, and the common destiny of people of African descent. Both Malcolm X and Walter Rodney, writing about the Black Power revolution in the 1960s, argues that the white world defines who is Black and who is white. Malcolm X argues there can be no Black-white unity until there is first some Black unity. We cannot think of uniting with others until we have first united among ourselves. When I think of 5 positive effects of reparations on Afro-descendant cultures in the Americas and beyond, I want to articulate these 5 and then move to close my remarks. The first positive effect of reparations is creating dignity through power. Reparations is an act of empowering people of African descent. And reparations can create dignity through power. And power is defined not just now in terms of culture, but also economically, politically, philosophically, and historically. Second, reparations will allow for the construction of a space of freedom through collective action. It is what the Kwanzaa principle called Ujamaa, empowerment through collectivization. Bob Marley sang it in Rat Race, collective security for surety. And the Nguni Zulu word, Ubuntu, declares the importance of solidarity. I am because we are. The wellness of the individual is tied to the wellness of the community. If there is no Black collective future, there is no Black individual future. The third positive effect is that reparations will allow us to return to cultural integrity, the right of return, mental and ideational, to Africa, where Africa can be seen as a space of innovation rather than a space of oppression. Fourth, reparations would lead to ownership, ownership of our communities, of our consciousness, of our capacity, what Garvey calls self-reliance. And finally, reparations would have a positive effect on educating Afro-descendant peoples for social change. Our existence did not begin with slavery, and our existence cannot end with racism. Reparations is a reminder that we do not have amnesia. Two of our cultural icons, Bob Marley and Peter Tosh, says it best. In Slave Driver, Bob Marley says, every time I hear the crack of a whip, my blood runs cold. I remember on the slave ship how they brutalized our very souls. Today, they say that we are free, only to be chained in poverty. Good God, I think it's illiteracy. It's only a machine that makes money. The trauma of enslavement still echoes in our bones. To use Professor Carolyn Cooper's metaphor, it is the noises in our blood. Peter Tosh, in 400 years, the ever-stepping razor, says, look how long, 400 years, way too long. That's the reason my people can't see. Sad, it's 400 years. Give me patience, they say, same philosophy. It's been 400 years. In closing, reparation is intricately linked to rehumanization of people of African descent. And we must bring reparations into existence. Malcolm X says it best. We declare our right on this earth to be human beings, to be respected as human beings, to be given the rights of a human being. We intend to bring this into existence by any means necessary. And ladies and gentlemen, we must bring reparations into existence by any means necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. McAlpin. Thank you so much for that presentation. Just to pull out a few of the highlights from a presentation, the whole notion of rehumanization, which really stems from the basis of our discussions today in terms of the defamation of a whole race of people that really dehumanizes us. And the extent of you have spoken to in terms of the acknowledgement of those images that we have come to live. You also mentioned the notion of Black solidarity and the extent to which, I'm paraphrasing, the extent to which we perpetuate among ourselves those negative images, the extent to which even our language reflect that kind of defamation. So we're almost sending the message on in terms of all these defamatory, slanderous, and libelous messages of us as a people. So you mentioned Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, etc. And I also now want to acknowledge the role of the government of Jamaica and CARICOM in terms of this whole movement towards reparatory justice. And the National Council of Reparations here in Jamaica, of course, set up by the bipartisan approach from the Jamaican Parliament. And of course, Minister Grange here leads that charge at this moment. I also want to acknowledge Professor Vereen Shepherd, who is in the room at this moment. and the role of the Center for Reparations Research at the University of the West Indies. Also the role of Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, who happens to chair the Caraïbean Reparations Council. And for those of us who don't know, there is a 10-point plan that CARICOM has come up with in terms of the path to reparatory justice, in terms of what are we asking for. And Prof. Shepherd, I know that the center has been charged with reformulating some of the, reformulating the 10-point plan, but I just want to highlight just the titles: a full formal apology, repatriation, Indigenous Peoples Development Program, cultural institutions, and today we are celebrating World Day for African and Afro-descendant cultures, public health crisis, illiteracy eradication, African knowledge program, psychological rehabilitation, technological transfer, and debt cancellation. And I just wanted to encourage those of us who are online, whether or not on Zoom or the other platforms, to really even go on the CARICOM website or to visit the CRR website to get basically information regarding reparatory justice and all the countries that were involved in a systematic attempt to dehumanize peoples of African descent. That's really what it is. It was really a system, and it's a system designed to perpetuate this continuous defamation. I'm now going to call on Mrs. Barbara Blake Hannah. And Barbara has been in the media recently because of her role at the British Broadcasting Corporation. Barbara Blake Hannah is a Jamaican journalist, author, filmmaker, festival organizer, and cultural liaison in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport. She served in the Jamaican Parliament as senator from 1984 to 1987, with the distinction of being the only Rastafari to sit in Parliament to date. Mrs. Blake Hannah is particularly known for her promotion of the Rastafari culture and history, among other things, in her literary works and through journalism, and currently serves as the director of the Jamaica Reggae Archives, which organizes the Reggae Film Festival and gives her name to the British Press Gazette Barbara Blake Hannah Prize. Mrs. Blake Hannah began her career as a journalist in Jamaica and went to Britain in 1964 to work as an extra on the film A High Wind in Jamaica. Over time, her work was carried out under the banners of the Caraïbean Times, West Indian World, the Sunday Times, Queen and Cosmopolitan. While in the United Kingdom, a notable appointment as reporter on the Thames Television Today carried with it the distinction of being the United Kingdom's first Black presenter. Mrs. Blake Hannah, however, was dismissed after 9 months without formal explanation, although her producer said the company was under pressure from a negative response from viewers on account of her race. Following this, she worked as researcher on the BBC's documentary series Man Alive. Her permanent return to Jamaica was researcher on the BBC's documentary series, Man Alive. Her permanent return to Jamaica was heralded by an offer in 1972 to work as a public relations officer in the film The Harder They Come, and she has enjoyed a successful career as filmmaker. She has written several books, including a 1982 account of the Rastafarian religion, and produced several more films, including a documentary for Britain's Channel 4, Race, Rhetoric, Rastafari, and that was in 1982. Blake Hannah's 1982 memoir, Going Out, Black Hair and Black Pride, in the swinging 60s chart, Her Life and Career in Britain. Her most recent literary work is Growing Up, Daughter of Jah. Her commitment to nation building has also found expression in her passion to see the development of sustainable indigenous crop through service to the Cannabis Licensing Authority from 2018 to 2020. Barbara, I now invite you to make your presentation.
Honorable Olivia Grange, Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport. Madame Sadai Sanchez Vegas, Director of UNESCO Caribbean Cluster. Madam Chair and Moderator, Chair of the National Council on Reparations. Distinguished speakers and webinar attendees. Good evening, it's my pleasure to be here. If you've ever been on the sharp end of Black racism, it's not difficult to identify with the suffering of other Black people under all kinds of racist regimes. In 1968, more than 50 years ago, I was such a sufferer. I had lived 4 years in British racism, but I had grown to accept it as the price to be paid to rise within the system. And rise I did, first as a journalist, then happy and proud to finally achieve a unique job as a television interviewer, the first Black person to be regularly employed in that capacity. It took only 9 months for racism to bring that joy to an end, with daily letters and phone calls saying, "Get that N-word off our screens." Though it was the same year in which the groundbreaking Race Relations Act had been passed in the British Parliament, making it illegal to deny employment, housing, and education to anyone on the basis of their racial origin, my employer, Thames Television, preferred to obey the wishes of their anonymous racist viewers than stand up for the principle their parliament had established. My contract was not renewed. Months later, in my next job at ATV Birmingham, racism continued to be a negative factor in the stories I was sent to report and in the attitudes of those I worked with. Racism even prevented me from renting a hotel room. I had to commute daily from London to do my job and endure other indignities. Eventually, unable to bear the scorn, hatred, and victimization I suffered daily from Britain's systemic racism, I returned to Jamaica and never regretted doing so. The after effects of enslavement of African people and the subsequent colonialism by European nations still remain entrenched and embedded in today's victims, as well as in the people whose ancestors committed the brutal and inhuman crimes. Yet most of the inheritors of Europe's crimes against Africans express themselves not in shame at the acts of their ancestors, but in racism against the descendants of their crimes. Fortunately, it's not all of them. On Sunday, June 7, 2020, hundreds of Black and white protesters at an anti-racism demonstration in Bristol, England, sparked by the murder of George Floyd, an unemployed Black American arrested for trying to buy something with a fake $20 bill, toppled a statue of a man named Edward Colson and dumped it in the Bristol Harbor. As a Black person watching on television the protests on the streets of America and the world, inspired by the rage thousands felt at seeing the callous way in which George Floyd's life had been taken by a white man, it was quite a surprise for me to see protesters in England direct their rage at a statue of a white man whose name and history I did not know, roll it in the street and dump it into the harbor, rejoicing all the way. I immediately searched the internet to find out more about the man, Edward Colston, and the reason why his statue had been treated so ignominiously. I was shocked to find that the statue had been erected in his honor because he had contributed so much to making Bristol a wealthy British city by shipping, selling, and enslaving African people. Colson must have played a role in my own Jamaican life 300 years ago as head of the largest and richest British company, the Royal African Company, that made its wealth by selling and enslaving Africans in the West, including to my own country, Jamaica. I knew nothing about this part of my own history. As I read, I learned that through the wealth earned from capturing, shipping, and enslaving Africans by the owners of the Royal African Company, Bristol became one of the biggest centers of the transatlantic slave trade in the 1700s, when it is estimated that profits of 5 to 20 million pounds, which is about 500 million pounds in today's money, were made from the trading of over 500,000 Africans brought into slavery by Colston and his Bristol slave traders. The Royal African Company became the best known and most successful British slave trading company in history, transporting an average of 5,000 slaves per year, shipping more enslaved African women, men, and children in the Americas than any other single institution during the entire period of the transatlantic slave trade. With the wealth earned from enslaving Africans in Jamaica and elsewhere, Colston built Bristol into one of Britain's wealthiest cities, with banks, schools, hospitals, aristocratic neighborhoods, paved streets, and a prosperous harbor used by fleets of ships transporting human bodies, gold, ivory, and other wealth on the triangular trade routes, which became the foundation of the British Industrial Revolution. The Royal African Company eventually declined, a major reason for which was the 1807 abolition of the slave trade, under which the global transportation of slaves after March 1808 was forbidden, followed by the abolition of slavery in 1804 and full emancipation. In Jamaica, that emancipation came after Sam Sharp, an enslaved African, united Africans across the island to make a bloody revolution that was so effective that it led the colonial government to admit that it was time to end the practice of slavery, though not before hundreds of captured revolutionaries were submitted to death, torture, and brutal flogging. Rolling down the Bristol street was a man who brought so much kidnapping, forced labor, pain, torture, loss of language, religion, and culture to so many thousands of Africans, and indirectly separation, abandonment, and lost history to the millions like myself who remain behind. One of the thousands of human bodies transported and enslaved by Colston belonged to an ancestor of mine, but I can never know who he or she was. I can only trace my ancestors from my father, who was born in 1907, to his father and no further, as he never knew his grandfather, who was born before slavery was abolished. As I read Colston's history, some of my pain turned into rejoicing at the sight of his proud memorial rolling down the Bristol street and dumped in the water. Wherever we live, whether in Jamaica, the Americas, or in Britain, all of us millions struggle to rise from poverty, illiteracy, lack of proper habitation, food, and a way of life equal to that of the descendants of Edward Colston and other white humans like him. We live with racism and police brutality, poor housing, low-level jobs, and poor education. Our men grow violent as a response to the denial of economic and social opportunities that are freely available to their white counterparts. Our women become poor mothers as they breed multiple fatherless children for whom they are forced to become breadwinners. Our children fill prisons from an early age. Racism remains endemic in white countries everywhere because the true history of the lives of white and Black people is hardly ever told or taught, though voices continually cry for this to be done, especially in Jamaica, where we plead for the teachings of national hero Marcus Garvey to be embedded in the education curriculum. The rise of the Black Lives Movement in 2020, inspired by the sacrifice of George Floyd, was a clarion call to attention by Black and white people who speak out against systemic racism. For me, Edward Colston's demise was the most important anti-racism event of 2020. To my great joy, 2 months later, I received a chance to actively participate in the anti-racism movement when the British Press Gazette established a press award in my name for Black and ethnic minority journalists, using the story of how racism caused me to lose my job 50 years ago to highlight the role the media must play to end racism. Out of what had been a bitter and humiliating episode of my life in England 50 years ago came a useful weapon 50 years later in the battle to end systemic racism. Talk about making lemonade out of lemons. The West must be decolonized, and essential to this decolonization is the teaching of a richer, more complex view of the imperial past and its bearing on the present. This can only be done by a constant reminder of the true history of relations between Africans and Europeans, the telling of the story in all its ugly details to educate and even shame those whites who believe that their scorn, hatred, and rejection of Black people is anything to be proud of. Yes, we must make them ashamed, and then we must teach them about love, the true purpose of humanity, and the message of the Christ, delivered so simply in the words of the song, Bob Marley's song, One Love. The work continues. Let Jah be praised.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Only you could tell that story so well. Having been in the belly of the beast, as you have so aptly outlined. And we are really grateful to you, and it is very important for us to tell our story. It really just goes back to what Dr. McAlpin said, telling our own story. And I saw in the chat from the Center for Reparations Research, just calling for us to look back at history the way we tell it. And you are one of the, in times to come, we are going to be considered to be one of the ancestors who told our story for us and who actually led that way. And I really want to thank you so very much. I'm going to move on to Professor Sir Godfrey Palmer, Jamaica's Honorary Consul in Scotland. Sir Godfrey is a Professor Emeritus in the School of Life Sciences at the Heriot Watt University in Edinburgh, Scotland, and a human rights activist. As a scientist, his final doctorate degree was Doctor of Science, an accolade above a PhD, and among other significant awards, he was awarded in 1998, the prestigious American Society of Brewing Chemists Award of Distinction for his work on groundbreaking research in the brewery industry. The award is widely considered to be the Nobel Prize brewing alongside his academic work. He is also a prominent human rights activist and is involved in a considerable amount of charity work in his community. He wrote a series of articles for the Times Educational Supplement from 1969 to 1971, another way to improve the education of children from ethnic minority groups. His book on race relations, entitled Mr. White and the Ravens, was first published in 2001, and he contributed an article to the Scotsman newspaper entitled Stephen Lawrence's Analysis, Society is More Mixed, but Racism Has Not Gone Away. We still have a long way to go. Palmer has also authored a book on the history of slavery, The Enlightenment Abolished, Citizens of Britishness in 2007, and has spoken out extensively against the slave trade. In 2007, the bicentennial of the abolition of the slave trade in the British Empire, Professor Jeff Palmer was named among the 100 Great Black Britons, as well as the 2020 updated list. He serves as the honorary president of Edinburgh and Lothian's Regional Equality Council, an Edinburgh-based organization which works to tackle discrimination and promote human rights and equality in the community, specifically with regard to 9 protected characteristics outlined in the Equality Act of 2010. Sir Palmer, I now ask you to take the virtual podium and to address us. Natasha, can you assist?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can now. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that a CV. Whenever I listen to that, I think of my mother, my dear mother who brought me up in Almond Town in Kingston. And she used to tell all her friends when they say to her, Miss Ivy, how's your son doing in Scotland? And she says, he's doing all right, but he's still at school. I was professor in the department then. And then when they ask her you know, how does he do all that stuff? She says he's God's vehicle. So I've never achieved anything as far as she's concerned, because I am God's vehicle. And that is terribly important. It's important because I was brought up in Almond Town in Kingston by 8 women. That's my mother's sisters and my mother. As one of your speakers alluded to, I wasn't brought up by any men because my culture, my slave descent, I am descended from a culture where there was no men around. My father left when I was 7. However, my aunts and my mother, you know, and I've done a lot of work now on Frederick Douglass, and I've just written an article about him for an American journal. But my aunts and my mother had the concept, it is better to build strong children than to repair broken men. That comes from Frederick Douglass. The point is that, you know, we talk about race, and there's been a lot said about race and racism. I'm involved in that at the moment. I've got a debate tomorrow with Scotland's most significant historian, Sir Tom Devine. And he and I is going to be discussing, we're going to discuss a difference of views, because what I'm saying, the concept of the inferiority or the stated inferiority of Black people was made by Hume, David Hume, in Edinburgh in 1753. And Hume is supposed to be the great mind, the great philosophical mind of reason. So we had this great mind of reason in 1753 saying, in my view, the Negroes are inferior to whites. So what we are debating today was stated by one individual, and that was taken up by Immanuel Kant, you know, in 1777, a few years later. And Kant linked that so-called inferiority to skin color, and thus we have race. And although I use the word race, I always say to people, you know, have a look in the dictionary at the definition of race. It isn't very good. The fact is that it cannot be defined, and what you can't define is meaningless. What you cannot define is meaningless. So we're in a struggle over a meaningless concept, which has no definition. You know, you have a black dog and a white dog, you don't call them different races. So human beings are the only living entity in which we've got the concept of race. And thus we should challenge that still. Because as I see it, you know, we're one humanity, nothing less. And therefore, to defy Hume, every one of us in this chat, in this meeting today, has defied Hume, because Hume says we didn't have the capacity to do anything other than cut sugarcane. And therefore, in fact, we must challenge the concept of race. We use it too lightly. In fact, we are doing the white racist job for them. Okay, we've got to use the term, but we must not believe it, because we're not different races. Now, my struggle in Edinburgh, and I'm not a historian, and the fact is that white people who are challenging me, say he's a brewer, or he's a chemist, he's a scientist, he's not a historian. And the reason why they're saying that is because I probably know this history about slavery more than they do, and they're the historians. So part of our weapon, we must know our history well. We must know this to challenge the falsehoods and the misconceptions. And this is what I've been trying to do. challenging the falsehoods, the misconceptions, like the Joseph Knight case, a famous case which lawyers learn all over the world, that Scotland abolished slavery in 1778. The fact is that I'm probably one of the first person, I'm not a lawyer. I've said, how can Scotland abolish slavery in 1778 before 1838? Because the person involved was not a slave. He was a servant. So how can you abolish slavery with a servant? This has taken a young boy from Oldman Town to challenge that. The point is that we have got to look at our history very carefully. And those misconceptions, we must challenge. And we've got to challenge it in writing. We've got to publish it. We've got to state it. Because when we do that, the white establishment that has created these misconceptions, that creates the concept that still enslave us, they are still winning. I've challenged the view, for example, that Henry Dundas, who in fact stopped Wilberforce from abolishing the slave trade. How many of us know about Henry Dundas? If I say William Wilberforce, you say, yeah, I've heard of him. But if I say Henry Dundas and you say you don't know who he is, then we don't know the history of the abolition of the slave trade. We don't. Because Henry Dundas was in fact the Home Secretary, and then he was Secretary of War that attacked Haiti. Henry Dundas destroyed Haiti in a sense that he was trying to destroy the French slavery industry, which was challenging the British one. Henry Dundas lost 40,000 troops in Haiti trying to destroy Haiti's slave industry, so it didn't compete with Jamaica's. Henry Dundas sent Lord Balcarres to Jamaica as governor. And it was Lord Balcarres who transported the Maroons to Nova Scotia in 1796. The point is that this is how I've had to use the history to make our case. And just recently, when somebody said, well, Jamaica, you know, we're always talking about Jamaica, I said, look, in 1782, as an example, 1782, the British Navy probably fought the most important naval battle, more important than Trafalgar, because the French decided they were going to take Jamaica. And Britain had to choose between America and Jamaica, and they chose to defend Jamaica because Jamaica was providing about 50% of the total income of British slavery in the Caribbean. So that little island has featured in the history of Britain, not just Jamaica, in the history of the world. And therefore, we've got to know that if we are going to challenge this concept of the abuse without reparation. I believe in reparation too. The point is that we have got to produce an argument for it. If we just ask for it, we won't get it. And the argument is to use our history as a justification for it. Now, if we want to talk about a little bit about Africa, and I will end soon because there are other speakers to come, but what I'd like to end on is that when my mother did her best for me, brought me to London with all the hard work, my brother, he came as well and he died. This is migration. This is post-slavery. And the point is that I went through the educational system here and I was designated ESN, educationally subnormal, because I was given a Eurocentric test when I came in 1955 to join my mother. But I managed to work my way through, and we don't have time to go into that. But what is important is that the education I received, that when Guinness, with their business in Nigeria, the company was in some difficulty, and Heineken is also in Nigeria. And I was asked to go to Nigeria to look at the raw material to see whether the company could use the local raw material. This is African grain. And I went and I made a decision that the local grain should be used. And this is what was done. And when I went to Nigeria a few times, and when I was leaving, the African said to me, "Thank you for LRM." And they were saying, "Thank you for the local raw material. You have given our local raw material dignity," because it is one of the most significant drinks in the world. The point is, this is a Jamaican or a Caribbean person going back to Africa to help. We must do that. And we, by doing that, using our education to defend our people, our history, and ourselves, by doing that, we are showing that the greatest mind in the world, philosophically, as people say, was wrong. The great mind of reason made up a tale about us. And what white historians are trying to do, and I'm defending our position tomorrow, they are now frightened because we're saying the greatest mind made up a tale against people to justify their enslavement. And those days are over. They are over. And the fact is that we are now are going to change the narrative. We cannot change the past, but we can change the consequences of the past, such as racism, for the better. And finally, we are one humanity, nothing less. That's the bottom line. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much too. And before I move on to the next speaker, I just want to, you said something, you said so many things, but you actually said those days are over. You said those days are over. You said we can't change the past. We know, and we can go back to what Marcus Garvey said. But you speak of the need to move forward with confidence. You speak of using education to defend our being, to defend who we are, and to change the narrative. You speak of the pronouncements of persons who don't know us, who can pronounce and determine who we are. We have been called many names. We have been given many brands. We have been called Negroes. We have been called niggers. We have been called people of color. We have been called Black people. And I agree that we need to define ourselves, and we need to use education to define ourselves, and we need to start where it needs to start. And it needs to start as basic as our basic schools. That's where it needs to start, because we need to start re-educating our people and allowing us to redefine in a real way and to rethink who we are, where we're coming from, where we're going. And I know in the interest of time, I will just now introduce Professor Earl Taylor, professional electrical engineer, educationist, development economist, strategic planner, management expert, international law scholar, and a seasoned diplomat. After serving in various capacities in Jamaica's public and private sectors, he had a 12-year stint as a senior officer director in the United Nations system with postings in New York, Vienna, Geneva, field offices in the West, East, and Southern Africa. In 1967, his electrical engineering graduation took place from the University of Technology, and he completed in 1974 postgraduate in management, University of the West Indies. He earned a Fulbright scholarship in 1979 and graduated in 1980 with a master's in international relations. In 1981, master's in law and diplomacy. He completed that from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. That was a joint Harvard-Tufts University. In 1982, he was awarded the Eisenhower Fellow and graduated from the ACU in 1983 with a doctorate in business administration. While serving as associate professor at Wharton Business School, he completed a second PhD in 1985. Concurrent with his appointment in Namibia, Professor Taylor served as many things, among them advisor to the Minister of Higher Education and Science and Technology and Research, where among other things, he facilitated the development of several national policies and institutions. He was chairman of the Center for Public Service and Training, advisor to the Office of the Prime Minister on Public Service Management in areas related to civil service training, and advisor to the Namibia Public Service Commission, strategic resource person to the Namibian Parliament, facilitator of diplomatic training, and a member of Africa-China think tank. Professor Taylor, I now ask you to make your presentation as we celebrate this wonderful day on the UNESCO calendar. Professor Taylor?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
First, let me recognize and appreciate the distinguished panel and to thank the Honorable Minister, Grange, and UNESCO for making this webinar possible. I want to discuss my presentation, and I have prepared a one-page presentation. But before I do that, I want to say that UN and UNESCO declarations and promulgations are necessary and desired, but they're not sufficient. We need to move, and when I say we, I am talking about Africa and its descendants, wherever they are, need to move the ball further with solid action beyond rhetoric. I had just an incident this morning, 24th of January, and I want to show you some of the challenges that we face in moving from talk to results. This morning, just in front of my gate, I live at the cul-de-sac, and there's a lot of traffic to view the very beautiful scenery beyond my house. This morning, a group of folks, I'll call them folks, they were walking and they were leashing their dog. And I noticed outside that there was some deposits left each time that this happens. So I decided this morning to just observe. And to my amazement, the dog did the exact thing as it did the days before. So I called to the gentleman and said, sir, you don't do that. You have a leash, then you should carry a scoop. And so I want you to take this up. So he said to me, oh, I said, the dog is just doing. I said, no, in Europe, you would carry a leash and a scoop. He said, well, this is Africa. So I said, it is Africa, but it represents your own story and your own attitude. And that's not acceptable for me. Okay, so that's one story. So that is a challenge of the character, the attitude that we face. And I don't know, I don't think it was racism, but it's an attitude that Africa is, you can do anything. And it rang in my mind the story that Trump talked about as these shithole countries. And I could see some parallel, how that happened to become a statement from a head of state. Now, my talk, my presentation is going to be essentially on defamation and what needs to happen to address that. But defamation is, to me, a proxy. And in diplomacy, you would say it's a proxy because it does not say everything, but it introduces a very difficult topic, very sensitive topic. And when you look at what is intended, and it's the UN, so they have to keep it as mild as possible, because you are going to be advocating against the same people that you need help from. So you have to temper it without losing your objective. So defamation for me is a proxy. It's a complex word that embodies a lot of things, of wrongs. So I would say it's the wrong. And if you start there, then you will understand that in any situation where strategy is to be applied, you must first define what the problem is. And that is the wrong, that is the injustice that has happened and that which we want to resolve. So that is injustice. So on my chart here, I have tried to look at what the problem is, and you will see in yellow, highlighted in yellow, all the issues related to the problem and the possible solution on the right-hand side. So we have the problem and we know exactly where we want to go, and that is eventually to reparation. Now, between those two, there's a lot of work to be done, and we have not started yet. We are just at the beginning, because as you know, many countries have, and I can tell you of Namibia, they started this fight with Germany for the genocide they created. And it goes back in the 1960s. They have come to the point where they have made recognition their first point or first target. So I have developed this chart in the second column, in what I'll call its brownish, the steps that need to be taken. And apology is the last one. You must first get recognition. And when you're doing strategic thinking, you do it, you put your objectives in a structured way, but you keep certain things in mind and you work on one thing at a time to get that home. So we need to get the people that we are contesting to first recognize that there's a problem. And I believe we have gotten that. So we have made some headway in the recognition. The next step is acceptance. Acceptance of what has been done. And this is where we need a lot of research. We need a lot of evidence. We need literature evidence. We need empirical evidence. And we need the evidence from our partners, international solidarity, to show and to get us to the point and to force acceptance if it's becoming too difficult for voluntary release. So acceptance is the second step. Then acknowledgement. And once we have gotten those three, then it is natural to have the apology. And that is what I call phase one. Now, I want to say here that we have some guidelines. You know, Marcus Garvey said one thing that impressed me, and he said, "We, the Negro race, are suffering more than any other race in the world from propaganda." Now, we could use propaganda as a proxy for defamation or for injustice or for racism. And he said, "We, the Negro race, are suffering more than any other race in the world from what is propaganda or racism. Propaganda to destroy our hopes, our ambitions, and our self-confidence." Now, when you destroy hope, when you destroy ambition, you destroy self-confidence, you destroy a people because they have nowhere going and no expectation. And so this is one of the challenge. Then he went on to say that never forget that intelligence rules the world, but ignorance carries the burden. Now, and what he was trying to tell us is that you have to be strategic, you have to be intelligent. You cannot just repeat the jargon and the rhetoric and please the people who you are trying to advocate against. So you have to be structured, strategic, and you have to apply intelligence. And that this means not only the negotiators, but our leaders. Our leaders are expected to apply strategy, strategic thinking, because that is how you're going to change the status quo. And lastly, Harriet Tubman, in a very famous quote, she says, "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if they knew only that they were slaves." So we have in that entrapment a people that is lost its hope, its self-confidence, and they don't know that they are slaves until something happens again. And because some of them, some of us have been able to enjoy the privilege of some of the things that we are fighting against, we got there by virtue of education, as our last speaker mentioned, by education and undeniable performance. We have been able to succumb and to overcome some of those challenges. But we should never forget that we are slaves, because we are not just in the battle for ourselves, we are in a collective journey to change a status quo, to build a society and a race that has been at the backbone and the forefront of civilization. So this is the challenge. So I want to now look at defamation and see how this package of injustice, of human rights violation can be overcome in a strategic way. The second battle, having looked at the first, which is the recognition down to the apology, the second step is what I call the big battle in that ground zone, the big battle. And that is the negotiation. To achieve reparation or reparative justice. There has to be unending consultation to legitimize every stage of the processes. So we have to consult with our people. And I have seen a lot of failure. For example, in Namibia, they have gotten to the point where Germany has acknowledged and apologized. They have come now to define the compensatory package. And that's where the battle starts, because you are dealing with a multi-generational set of disciplines. People from several generations, and we are discussing it with today's generation. So there is some ambivalence in the part of those with whom we are negotiating. They are willing, but they say it was my fault. So we have to be able to look at those issues. And Namibia is at the point where Germany offered some settlement, Namibia says, and it was almost taken by the government until the people who were affected says, no, this is not acceptable because you are not consulted with us and we have a lot more to say and to expect. So the ball has started again. And so it's important that consultation be a basic integral part of the process to legitimize and to give legitimacy to both the people we are advocating against and the people we are advocating for. That is important. And this is where I believe we need to unleash the power, the intellectual power of universities. They need to be partnering. And I can see University of West Indies is doing quite a lot, but it needs to do more. We need to go beyond the rhetoric. We need to do empirical evidence and search, get out all the things, because when it comes to negotiation and to compensation, unless you have hard evidence, it's going to be difficult to quantify. So we need to engage all those institutions, and it doesn't have to be contract, because we are in the same boat, we are fighting the same battle. So it can be partnership, and universities are there to advance knowledge. So it's a part of the expectation from a university, from a research institution. So we need to engage our institutions to say, come, we need to find answers to these challenging questions, these hard evidence. Help us to uncover them. And then once we are able to do that, then our negotiators have the tools to use, to apply those numbers and to get some sort of result. But we are far from that process. Now, I want to say that once we have the basis of an agreement, then we can now look at race relation. And these things happen in parallel because race relation, and that is on the middle side of the chart, which is, I think it's in purple. And then we look at the gray. The gray area is race relations. And that is, to me, that continuous massaging to build respect, to develop the institutions that generate evidence of disrespect, that look at how we change the cultures, how we understand the diversities of culture, how we behave with one another, how we respect each other, how we deal with each other. And that has to be encapsulated in the values of our institution. So in the value of our institution, when we do our strategic plan for the country or for the institution, these values must be integral part of that institution. And these values must be lived. And that is how we're going to build race relations. When we do trade, we must carry the culture that we believe are the best to represent our country. And we have a lot of cultures, but we have to define those which we want to project in our diplomacy, in our trade, in our investment. And they must be wrapped up in how we do our business as a government, as a country, as an institution. So race relation is fundamental, but it has to be practiced. How we behave, how we deal with each other, how we respect each other. And we cannot any longer be silent. As I did this morning, I said to those folks, this is not how what we expect. This is not the Africa in your mind. This is a new Africa, and you must cooperate. And so we need to be proactive in practicing these values. And lastly, I want to look at the institutions that not only defend or develop, but promote the solutions. And there's a lot of reform that is necessary, and we need research to be directed at those institutions and what needs to change. We have laws on our books that have remained there forever. Stupid laws, and we saw it in the recent thing where the Governor General was wearing a medal built on slavery, the mentality. So there are a lot of things we need to change. The parliament needs to change. The court system needs to change. We need to change the media construct, the construct that defines and drives the media. That needs to change, because these are institutions that either perpetuate or project the values that we think are the best for the country. And that will support, in the end, race relations. It will support our effort to challenge and destroy the drivers and the levers of defamation and injustice and human rights violation until the point where we get reparation. But we must look beyond reparation, because how do we cementize reparation? We need to continue a lot of work beyond the agreement for reparation. And so we need to engage our researchers, our institutions, and I must thank and commend the Ministry of Culture, because they have taken this bull by the horn. And I believe if we are able to integrate it into our foreign policy, into our trade relations, into our representations, we will, and to live what we say, what we project our values, I believe we'll be able to resolve the issues of racism, of injustice. And lastly, before I leave, we as Africans in Africa and in diaspora have to express more. We have to do more. We are not doing enough to support the efforts. We have to do more to respect ourselves. For example, we have the AU. The AU, in this time and age, is difficult to get a flight from one place in Africa to another. So the connectivity, and that's the easier part, to build the bridge to unity, where we have different sovereignties and different regulations and rules, is a massive task. We make progress and we destroy progress because we are still caught with our own importance. So we need, as Africans, to rethink, to reform our own attitudes, and to call on our brothers and sisters that are not in line with the overall AU thinking, to put them back in line. And if we don't do that, whatever effort is done at the diaspora level is going to be destroyed by ourselves if we don't work together. So I want to end there, and I will be happy to come back in the question and answer period. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. You have said much. And I want to say that Minister is online, and perhaps she wants to comment a little later after the final speaker, because the ministry, through her auspices, will be embarking on the development of a national policy on reparatory justice, which will form the roadmap. What you have articulated here today certainly will assist in that process in determining the strategy. And you have really noted many issues, both local, regional, and global, as well as putting us in touch with the continent in terms of what are some of these things that we need to do to advance these discourses and these different dialogues as it relates to reparatory justice. You basically also spoke to the 1, 2, 3s, the balancing of the scale, the need to understand where we are in an international framework, an international political framework, in which we are also still dependent on aid. You perhaps never said it that way, but we understand that we are dependent to an extent on the developed world, and that to an extent we're also dependent on those who owe us. You also spoke to the need. You mentioned Marcus Garvey. You mentioned many quotes that we really haven't heard. And you also went back to the notion that as people of African descendancy, that we need to hone together, and we need to understand our own differences, our own histories in terms of our own development, because we are here, the continent is there, but there is that connection, that connecting link. We have developed our own cultures. We are celebrating a day today that talks about African cultures, because we have one basic culture, but we have developed our own depending on the different nations in which we are at. And that speaks to the dynamism of Black people as a people and as a diverse set of peoples. So I really want to just thank you. And I'm sending out a note to our team to note that these points are really important as we develop this policy as Jamaica's part, because we're actually very serious about it. And we recognize that we need to really strategize, because it is not an easy road, but it is a road that we can accomplish. And I also want to just note one more thing, your notion of it's a dynamism of the discussion. You speak about multi-generational issues, past generations, intra-generation, speaking about generation existing today, and also the intergeneration, and the notion that we are here because we are negotiating on behalf of generations to come. And that negotiation, those negotiations must bear fruit as it relates to those who are yet to come. And I want to thank you very much, and to move on to our final speaker for the day, who is Natasha Bahar Singh. She has been our host online, and she's also a consultant to the National Council on Reparations. Natasha is a Jamaican, graduate of the Herbert Morrison Technical High School. She has been involved in numerous community projects and cultural initiatives from her early days, and I'm just learning now that she was one of the top 10 finalists in the Jamaica Cultural Development Commission Popular Song Competition. If you had time, I'd ask her to sing. In 2001, she was crowned Miss Granville Community Cultural Queen, and later JCDC Miss St. James Festival Queen. Her pre-university studies at the Montego Bay Community College was characterized by involvement in several extracurricular activities and student leadership posts. She was part of the Rotary Club of Montego Bay, where she had an outstanding graduate service award, among other things. While at the UWI, she was also heavily involved in the school's community and also held a lot of positions of leadership. Outside of her formal training, she has harnessed several skill sets and continues to utilize them in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. She was a radio broadcaster on Hot 102 FM of a current affairs program, Mike 123, with a segment for local and international legal human rights affairs. And since 2018, collaborates with Area FM on outside broadcasts for special radio events, and has also been co-host on Africa Forum, Running Africa with Kabu. And I saw her online earlier today as well. Since 2001, she participates publicly and privately in several initiatives for charity, cultural and youth development initiatives, and has taught in the formal education system as a teacher of history and social studies. She has been a research assistant locally and in the Bahamas, and conducted several history-focused face-to-face interviews, including interview with Pan-Africanist and former ambassador Dudley J. Thompson, Queen's Counsel. Since 2013, she has embarked on the path of advocacy for the human rights and dignity for all peoples of African descent. She's currently an avid advocate and activist for women's rights, cultural rights, and reparatory justice. In 2020, Ms. Bahar Singh was selected by the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights as a fellow in the International Decade for People of African Descent Human Rights Fellowship Program. And after successful completion of the program, was added to the global list of the decade as ambassador and a member of the 100 most influential people of African descent under the age of 40. She is currently a reparatory justice consultant to the Center for Reparations Research at the University of the West Indies, and legal, technical, and administrative consultant to Jamaica's National Council on Reparations, an agency of the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport. Natasha, welcome, and thank you so much so far for your wonderful hosting, as usual.
Thank you, Chair Lolita Davis-Mathis, for your kind introduction. I am at the closing, so my presentation will be brief. I want to extend thanks to the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sports through our Honorable Minister Olivia Grange, who is also a past chair of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage Committee. I also want to extend thanks to the National Council on Reparation, Jamaica, the NCR, for extending its mandate to these important webinar series, which no doubt greatly assist in building awareness around the situation faced by the people of African descent in Jamaica and in her diaspora, and for their continued encouragement and engagement in activities which have no doubt advanced the objectives of the International Decade for the People of African Descent, while of course, steadily building their case for reparatory justice for the victims of the transatlantic slave trade. As I stated, my presentation is brief, and it is a culmination of the rich food for mind, body, and soul thought that we have all consumed from all the presenters this afternoon. As we say in Jamaica, in essence, I am the human Bambai for the evening. The little toops of food you put down for later when you feel peckish. I feel honored to be part of such a stellar lineup. Congratulations to the team. All the presenters and messages hold a common thread: recognition, justice, and development for the people of African descent. As one of the United Nations Human Rights Fellows for the people of African descent, and a proud member of the global list of 100 most influential African descent person of African descent under the age 40, and a descendant of enslaved Africans brought to these lands, I hold the responsibility of representing my generation with the greatest honor and consideration of always, without fail, using my platform to speak truth to power. The decade's responsibility has added to my duties to extend my voice, my service, my commitment to fulfilling this leg of the relay towards the said recognition, justice, and development. And I make bold to say this afternoon that as people of African descent, your duty should be extended too. Today, Jamaica and the world celebrate yet another World Day for Africa and African descendant culture. We celebrate, firstly, the many known vibrant cultures of the African continent and African diaspora around the world, acknowledging our culture to be a rich source of the world's shared heritage. As a student of international law, it would be remiss of me to not highlight the ancestral alignments that have brought us all to this space. This day also coincides with the adoption of the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance in 2006 by the heads of government of the African Union. This day, this celebration in its many folds, therefore brings to prominence the efforts and the struggles for strengthening the role of culture in promoting peace on the continent of Africa and in her diaspora. It is seen largely that the people of African descent have made outstanding contribution to the development of societies and nations throughout history and continue to do so today. However, there have been very limited recognition and appreciation of our heritage and culture due to the overshadowing by racial discrimination, manifesting largely in the phenomena of the group defamation that we so ably explained today. I put it to our group today that in keeping with the conversation we're having, to understand our claim towards cultural preservation and anti-defamation of our heritage, one would have to understand our full origins. So some of our presenters today sankofaed the journey. I sankofa a little further. The classical Africa, the early African development, African scientific and technological developments, the main West African states in the mid-15th century before the Mahafa, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, and then we go to the decline and the impact of the transatlantic trade in Africans on Africa. According to Professor Vereen Shepherd and Sir Hilary Beckles, two of our prominent historians and reparative justice scholars, in their work, Liberty Lost, Urban Indigenous Societies and Slave Systems, an important feature of the ancient civilization of West Africa was that its people, its goods, religion, and culture moved all over the world. So there was a value of exchange of scientific ideas, technologies, and culture between Asia, Europe, and the Mediterranean and West Africa, particularly in the areas of agriculture and industrial production. This exchange of knowledge shows the extent to which world cultures interacted with each other. We see in recent years that many different scholars have also tried to look at the importance of Africa's cultural features and global connections before the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africa. They, with cogent evidences, are able to criticize the European scholars who have over decades denied the positive global influences and cultural impact of Africa on the world and on development. They use unfounded ideas of racial superiority to explain why European culture was more advanced than African culture. As color activists, we understand that to get through this phase of our lives and to move forward in accepting our own identity, we have to always remember it. We have to recognize the power in remembering, which allows for some myths to be easily deconstructed and some mysteries to be easily demystified. So we look to ancient Egyptian civilizations and the powerful role it played in both Africa and European early development. Research shows that if we look further, we can locate African development in West Africa, for example, around 5000 BC, that it was one of the greatest moments in world history and one of the most outstanding achievements of Africans. We see where Ghana, Mali, as was Shanghai, powerful medieval states in Africa before the Western Europeans made contact, advancing in their own crafts. They all had strong governments, prosperous economies, and in their own right owned their crafts. The then Ghana was known as the land of gold. In 1332, Mali was considered to be a wealthy commercial dynamic state with a reputation throughout Europe and the Mediterranean for culture and learning. When we come forward and we look towards cultural preservation and anti-defamation, we echo Bob Marley. 2,000 years of history, Black history, could not be wiped away so easily. It is seen that the experiences of our ancestors as chattel slavery was the most extreme form of exploitation that any race of people had ever undergone. Yet we survived. Our forebearers protected their humanity and identity, and over time, redefined themselves as new, vibrant cultural forces. It is also a fact that as enslaved people, we were never culturally dehumanized. We adapted. We took on cultural customs and traditions that strengthened our ethnic identity. We developed new attitudes and practices that has come to shape our Caribbean civilization. Today, we see that despite the interruption of the transatlantic slave trade, there was a movement of culture, ideas, arts, values, and religion from the motherland to the Caribbean. There was the transfer of culture, which is evident in our ethnicity, our rites, our rituals, our food, our sense of religious and spiritual identity, dances, and music. In concluding, in which what appears to be a very riveting discussion, I embrace all the presenters, and I conclude by saying, yes, we mark the transatlantic slave trade in Africans, which forcefully removed 10 to 20 millions of our Africans, brothers and sisters, ancestors, mothers and fathers, as a significant interruption. But through our resilience, it was not the end of continental Africa and her diaspora, because we, the people of African descent, as scattered as we may, are making strides against the odds, leading homes, communities, institutions, becoming professionals, Grammy Award winners, world liberators, one love specialists, prime ministers, presidents, vice presidents, and most influential people of this world, creating reach and impact and grounding, tearing down remnants and vestiges of colonialism and drowning them in their own seas of despair, while we create the path to our own truth, justice, and reconciliation with our true motherland, seeking, with or without Committee of International Nations, reparation and repatriation. We look forward as we achieve higher heights as descendants of a great cultural movement. Long before the interruption, we speak truth to power, knowing fully, as Marcus Garvey said, If we as a people realize the greatness from which we came, we would be less likely to disrespect ourselves. And I close by saying, let alone allow others to continue to disrespect and defame us. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Fellow. You have learned very well. Natasha has been our last speaker, but certainly not the end of the session. I know that we're running late, and I'm going to ask Minister Terry Long to give closing remarks, after which we're going to open the floor. Natasha, do we have sufficient time for at least 10 to 15 minutes of questions?
Well, Chair, if we're going for 7 o'clock, we have 4 minutes.
Okay, we're going to lose the link?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay, fine. So people can stay on, right? That's it.
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure. And Natasha, just to say that in terms of representation, again, thank you very much. You noted the power of memory. And Professor Taylor actually mentioned that. I think that has been a recurring theme, the notion of memory, the fact that we can't change our past, but we can actually deconstruct and move forward. And you mentioned the word deconstruction. And I also want to say that as we seek to deconstruct our language as a people, we need to be very cognizant and deliberate. So for example, you will notice we speak of enslaved peoples rather than slaves. And there's a deliberateness to that. And that's because we recognize that our people were stolen. We have different ideologies about what happened in Africa and who sold who, but the bottom line is that nobody sent anybody here for chattel slavery purposes. So, and that's a historical fact. The issue, therefore, is that we must begin to deconstruct the language and how we refer to ourselves. And therefore, we talk about enslaved rather than slaves. So there are many things in our own language that we need to change. We need to recognize and teach our children about the role of Africa in globalization. I mean, we know that Africa is the cradle of humanity. We know that most of the natural resources of the world are in Africa. We all know that, but how much of that do we teach our children? Where is that in the social studies books? I'm not a social studies teacher. Maybe it's there, so forgive me if I made a wrong reference. However, I really want to point out the notion of even how we speak of Africa as a continent with many countries. We speak of New York and we speak of Florida because those are states. When you want to speak, but for Africa, we lump every country together in Africa. And we don't recognize that Africa was divided not by Africans. Africa was divided by the Europeans. So in other words, part of how we teach our children, the images that we see, when we look at many magazines, if we want to show pictures of poverty, what do we see? Black people. If we are looking at a movie, I mean, traditionally especially, and even now, you usually know that the black man in the movie is a bad guy. He's gonna die. He's a criminal. Yes, we have evolved, and thank God for those African Americans and those people of African descent who have used media to advance the images of Black people. Because there was a time we all know that's what it was. And we must actually teach it because those images still remain. So Natasha really spoke on many things and pulled the discussions together. And I really want to thank you for that and for us to understand that when we talk about Africans being great, it's not something that we just say to make ourselves feel better. It's truth. It is the truth. And before I move on to Mr. Terry Long, I just want to read excerpts from Amanda Gorman's poem, The Hill We Climb, in the inauguration of the new President of the United States. It's just an excerpt, very short. We are the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president only to find herself reciting for one. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption we feared at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it, we find the power to author a new chapter. And I just really want us to have the audacity of hope and the audacity to believe that reparatory justice is attainable. And that as we move forward, we recognize that we are negotiating, as I said before, for our children and our children's children. And we must put this reparatory justice in a context, and we must move forward understanding who we are. Then this is not just a narrative for Sunday evening or webinars. This is a new narrative that we must embrace and must speak. And I'm going to invite the Honorable Minister to give closing remarks. And the Honorable Alanda Terry-Long, Member of Parliament, on September 15, 2020, he was appointed Minister of State in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport. This would be his second appointment as Minister of State in this ministry. For his contribution to the strategic direction of the ministry, Terry-Long, is keen to focus on certain key pillars: the preservation and promotion of cultural and natural heritage, cultural industries, culture as a tool for development, gender and identity matters, entertainment and entrepreneurship, and the development of the industry within the global digital sphere, sport as a tool for nation building, and global partnership. Before his reassignment to the ministry, he served as Minister of State in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, with direct portfolio responsibility for youth and information. Minister Terry-Long is a graduate of Campion College and the University of the West Indies, where he studied law. He was admitted to the Jamaican bar after successfully completing his legal education at the Norman Manley Law School, where he was a recipient of several awards and represented the law school and Jamaica internationally. In 2008, he was awarded the Chevening Scholarship by the British Council in Jamaica to pursue a master's degree at the University of Warwick in the UK. There he studied international relations, international criminal law, international human rights, and following his master's program, he moved to Madrid, Spain, where he worked with an independent European think tank. And that was the Foundation for International Relations and Foreign Dialogue. Terry-Long returned to Jamaica in 2010 and began to lend his voice to the dialogue surrounding social issues necessary to effect change and development in our society. He became a guest columnist for local newspapers, writing about politics, law, and social justice. His commitment to nation building has pivoted him into his political arena, where he continues to lead, inspire, and transform. Minister, over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. First of all, let me thank all our participants for just, splendid presentations that really, that really set the basis for reparation. We know one of our professors noted that reparation is not just something that you ask for. You simply have to make the case for it. And I believe that we've all highlighted and identified, several cases for reparation, and certainly the need for reparation for us as a people of African descent. It was our national hero Marcus Garvey who noted that a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. And I quite like this quote because I think it relates so much to us even now in 2021, as we see the global changes, as we see the Black Lives Movement going in America, as we hail the ascendancy of Vice President Kamala Harris, also of Jamaican history and Jamaican heritage. So it is very important for us nonetheless to recognize that in Jamaica, while we speak about reparations, for us to make the dialogue that much simpler, so that the ordinary Jamaicans can understand why it is important for us as a people, why it is important for us to recognize and never forget the horrors of the last 500 years, but more importantly, also where we came from before the horrors of slavery. And I quite like that our presenter at the end, she mentioned the great empires of Mali. Mali under the control of Mansa Musa was one of the most, certainly was one of the richest cultures and countries, throughout the world back in the 14th and 15th centuries. We could speak about the Moors who controlled the Iberian Peninsula, much of Southern Europe for more than 700 years as well. We speak about the great empires of Benin and Oyo and the Yoruba people, the Ashanti, the Zulus, and what the Europeans did to them over the last few centuries. So I'm happy that the conversation has moved beyond the discussion of how Europe underdeveloped Africa, but how Europe perpetuated a culture of enslavement of African people for centuries, a world social, financial, and economic order that is based on white supremacy, and that is based on white supremacy, and that even 500 years later, we have seen that white powers and certainly European cultures, that they have sought to destroy and eradicate much of the historic might and the glory and the stories and the cultures and civilizations of great African nations and just our culture generally as people of Afro descent. So it's important that we recognize that this sort of racial discrimination against African people, it started for financial and economic means centuries ago. And that social, that financial and economic pyramid, it still exists. But even more than that, we must recognize as a people the ills that happen in our very own country. Certainly I have experienced racism in Jamaica and outside of Jamaica. But I find that the ignorance of what racism really is and the discrimination that stems from the enslavement of people of Afro descent, of African people, of Black people that look like you and I find that we somehow find comfort in, oh, well, I live in a particular part of Jamaica, or I work in a particular job, or I get to wear a suit and so forth. And we don't realize that the vestiges of slavery and enslavement and that discrimination, it still festers the minds of our people. So when you have people in Jamaica who believe that they must still bleach their skin, that they must somehow destroy the melanin that makes them so beautiful, because they somehow want to look like the oppressors, like persons that oppressed us for centuries. It shows that we have not completely and truly emancipated our minds, emancipated ourselves, emancipated our very nation from mental slavery. So one of our presenters, McAlpin mentioned about, Blackness and its association with ignorance, and just generally how people view themselves. And I quite enjoyed his presentation because I too find that even in Jamaica, there is this lull that, oh, well, no, it doesn't exist here, but it does. I recall a discussion I had with one expert from Ireland, Madam Chair, and he said to me, we were at a party and I was in a particular section. It was a Shaggy and Friends party because this is a discussion. I know this is a discussion. We were at a Shaggy and Friends party and I had bought 4 tickets in support of the children and we were in the VVIP section. And I remember going for a drink to get a glass of wine. And one of the bartenders looked at me, he said, I'm not serving you. I said, how do you mean not serving me? He goes, but why are you over here? I said, I'm sorry. He goes, let me see your armband. I said, excuse me, sir, you're out of order. And he insisted on seeing my armband because he could not believe that a Black man looking like him with locks was in this VVIP era that was dominated by persons of a particular hue. The supervisor came over, spoke to him about it, and I asked what was the issue. He told the supervisor that he thought I was one of the employees. That shows how we see ourselves as a people, that we don't belong in certain societies or we don't belong in certain spaces simply because we are Black, simply because our forefathers were enslaved and we don't have a particular hue, or because we don't live in a particular community, or because we don't go to a particular school. And those are the things that still affect and permeate the very minds of our people right here in Jamaica. So this discussion is important, but it must be simplified as well so that the ordinary Jamaican understands why it is so important that we have this discussion about racial discrimination and the need for reparation. And in my discussion with an expert who was at the very same concert, he said, but he did not even have a ticket for the VIP section. But because of the color of his skin, everybody in Jamaica just assumed that he belongs into every single space that he enters. So security guards and everybody, they open gates and they let him in freely, and he goes here and he goes there simply because of the color of his skin. And he said, but I cannot understand why Jamaica, which is so rich with the culture of Bob Marley, with the philosophy of Marcus Garvey, that you all somehow still don't understand that you are equals and that you are perhaps even culturally superior to others. So it is an honor for me to be a part of this discussion. I have the need for education and the re-education of our young kings and queens. And whilst I was state minister in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, I purposely decided to refer to the youth of Jamaica as our young kings and queens, for them to understand again that slavery or the enslavement of their people interrupted a great part of their history. That part of their history where there were great kings and queens and great warriors and great scientists and philosophers, and they were great explorers and they were great architects and developers. You know, because much of that is lost. When I speak to our young people and I ask them, well, do you know about, well, Mali, for instance, it was mentioned today. No, they don't. They don't know the names of great kings and queens of Africa. They don't know the names of great civilizations. So that education, and it's something that we have not yet started to even grasp in Jamaica, the importance of telling our story in a way that our youth understand that they come from greatness and that they can achieve greatness. And when we look at the writings of Kwame and Nkrumah, I mean, he foretold that it's important for us to rise to be one of the greatest forces for good in the world. And this discussion, having heard from all of you, I am proud to say that that collectivity, that collective need to stand together, to rise as a great force, I believe that we are on the cusp of a new day. And so, to summarize in closing, I want to thank you all. Like the great Harriet Tubman, as was noted by Professor Taylor, it is important that we let our brothers and sisters mentally understand that they become aware of the trappings of comfort, the trappings of modern day slavery, modern day racism, that they know how to recognize it, that they too will one day want to break free of those chains and those those trappings. So this discussion continues. It doesn't end today. I want us to continue the discussion until that change for reparation, for restorative justice, for all our people becomes a reality. Thank you all.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Minister Granger, I understand you will take the floor. Minister?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Minister.
I really have found this webinar just so fulfilling, so exciting. All the presenters were excellent. The freshness that Ms. Border Singh or Kodernati brought to the table, and my Minister of State, I mean, they are the future. And, we can say the future in good hands. And the sort of experience and knowledge that has been put here forward by Professor Palmer and our professor from Namibia. I think this has been fantastic. Professor McAlpin and Chair, your moderator, you have been fantastic as well. That's excellent. I mean, this thing has been so rich. Commissioner Macaulay, I will certainly be pulling you in on the NCR, right, Lalita?
Yes, Minister, of course.
Yes.
Prepare to work.
You have so much to offer. We want to put you to work and give you additional work, I mean, at this time.
Yes, rather.
And of course, Barbara, who is right here as our cultural liaison. And we haven't touched Rasta yet. We haven't touched the full sum of our discussion on Rastafari, which will be part of another webinar. And I think all those who have listened, who share with us, we are on several platforms, and we have had many comments. People have found this very, very interesting. So I think that today we have learned so much. We have shared in so much, and I want to leave room for questions. I think we just have a little time left. I hope we can take a few questions, and even I have a special interest in what's happening in Namibia with the negotiations and where they have reached in discussing reparations. So, Professor Taylor, I don't know if we'll have time to hear a little about that, but Madam Moderator,
yes, Minister.
I will really hand over to you because I could go on and just picking on several things to say. HMS, you know, this has really been a great opportunity for us to share and for us to host and to invite others to come and just enrich what we have to offer here in the ministry. You know, so this has been a wonderful experience.
Thank you so much, Minister. So we are going to, it's now 7:16. We can continue until 7:30 if there are questions. There has been quite a number of comments in the chat, but we will open for presentation, and participants can actually identify if there's any particular speaker that you want to answer the questions. And Minister, I've been looking through the chat and I see we actually have participants from Haiti as well as Curacao, I think I saw earlier. So the floor is now open. Natasha, I'm going to ask you to monitor.
Durham?
Please.
No, from all over. Yeah.
Are there any specific questions that outside of what we have here in the chat?
Well, maybe Professor Taylor could tell a little about the negotiations that's taking place
yes.
in Libya.
Right, because we have like 3,000 people on Facebook, so it's very difficult to monitor.
Okay. Professor Taylor, thanks, Natasha.
Yes, Professor, can you tell us a little about the negotiations that's taking place between Germany and Namibia? You're hearing us, Professor?
I think he's muted.
I think you're muted. You're muted. Could you unmute?
Hello.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
We're interested in hearing a little more about the discussions that have taken place and that are taking place now between Germany and Namibia. Maybe a little about the
this process started many years ago and it has taken several phases. And I explained they went through the recognition to the apology and then the negotiation for compensation, reparation. They have made Germany and they have the Chancellor as himself been here to offer the apology. They have also returned a number of evidence, skulls that were taken during the process of dehumanization. They have returned 3 batches. I think there's still a last batch to come back. But this is evidence, and that is what I mentioned, that you need to have hard evidence to support a case for reparation. So they made an offer to government, and that offer was not acceptable. So it is now back on the negotiating table. But you may remember that a case was brought in New York by one of the main advocates of the reparation discussion, because he actually took it out of government because government was going too slow or not in the way that they expected. So when I mentioned the consultation, it's very important to legitimate, to get the citizens who have been affected to be a constant part of the discussion, not just by their representative, but they should be informed. So it was they who took it upon themselves to not accept the offer. And so it's back into Germany, back into the discussion. But I must say that Germany has been, as part of the apology and the acceptance, they have been doing a lot of aid work. They have been giving a lot of money to Namibia in different aspects of aid and technical aid, and also funding different projects. But it was never packaged as a part of the reparation. It was never clothed as reparation. It was their gesture of conscience. So, and that's one of the dangers that you find when you get piecemeal response. So it must be packaged, and it has to be sold to the people so that they accept and put a closure to that. So at this point, they are now renegotiating the package again. But there's acceptance, there's everything is already there. It's just to the negotiation and to use the evidence.
Thank you, Professor.
There's a Shireen Davis whose hand is up. You see? Shireen Davis?
Yes. I was typing my question because I know it's many persons that are in the chat. Good evening, everyone. So I must say, first of all, I'm honored to be a part of this chat. I'm honored to be born in this time, to be a part of and to witness a great change like this, where there's a level of acknowledgement that is, happening, where people recognizing the value of our descendants and so on and so forth. Now, there was mention, and this question is anyone of the presenters can answer, but there was mention of us making sure that our story has been told. We need our own storyteller. And you mentioned about it being taught in the schools. Your example was about social studies don't have certain things in there about some of the Black kings and queens and so on, which I totally agree. And as a student going in high school, I remember asking my history teacher, what happened before slavery? Because all we learned and studied for exams were relating to slavery. And there is more to us than slavery, as another presenter said, that our life didn't start there and it shouldn't end there. Now, in regards to that, our education system has come a long way, but it was devised by our colonizers to produce people that could build their industry, which was the plantation lifestyle, right? Now, we are growing and we're getting better. And I know Rome wasn't built in a day, but I believe that we can still make changes in our education system to ensure that the curriculum is more culturally relevant, because what we are studying and the book that we are putting on the book list for our children to read is still glorifying the story from the Europeans' perspective. And so I wanted to know, what is the first step that we could take in changing that? Because yes, we're all for reparation, we're all for these things, but remember that we are still shaping minds, and it's the students up today that become part of the nation for tomorrow. So we can't say we want reparation, but we still not change the things that we're teaching our children. So what would be the first step, in going forward in this direction now that we have gotten here? That is my question.
Madam Moderator?
Okay, Minister.
I can take the first part.
Okay, go ahead.
Of the question about the first step, which would be something that we've been embarking on through the educational aspect of reparation. As I had explained earlier, we're in the decade of the people of African descent, and part of the decade is really through recognition, justice, and development to enhance the curriculum. So you're onto something. What historians like Professor Shepard and Beckles and those historians who recognize the same thing you have recognized, place forward is a revisionist history approach. So first, we need to embark on something that I know our chair of the NCR usually talk about, is to go into the primary school, start from there, and start the initiative where we re-educate in a different way. So that is the first thing. We have to employ the revisionist history approach, where we write our own history, which we've started actually. We have our own historians who, when they do their own research, some of the things I've said, they have located within our history package what we need to put forward to our population. So that would be a good start from my perspective. Don't know which other presenter would like to.
No, thanks, I just wanted to adjust briefly to that, to say, when you think about it, I think these are some of the discussions that we actually should have, but we don't want to have. And this is a continuing series, but to answer your question more specifically, can you imagine if when your child starts to learn to read, so we're talking about, we have kindergarten teachers, that's where we start education in Jamaica, right? And our kindergarten education system here is a very robust one. Our students are far advanced at age 4, for example, than in many other countries, just because of how we do our own business. Can you imagine if in a coloring book or a reading book, all the children, they see themselves? And of course, we have out of many one people. So that's a recognition as well that we have to understand and what that means for us. But can you imagine if we learn, if our stories are about ourselves, our people, that if we talk about the African continent, what it is, and the notion of, so what happened before slavery? Yeah, correct. So with our lives didn't begin there. And Minister Terry Long, I wrote down what he said, he said, slavery interrupted, I'm just really paraphrasing, but he said, slavery interrupted our being. I'm paraphrasing. Slavery interrupted our great past and potential for our future growth. So there was an interruption. So where do we go from there? It's like taking back what belongs to us. So reparations is just a part of our story, as one of the other speakers said. It's really a part. And whilst we wait and negotiate, there are things that we need to do. Because giving us new schools, giving us a new education system, health system, that's not going to change our perception of ourselves. So that work needs to begin in the education system, as you have just indicated. As a young person, I just really want to say how heartened I am to hear your views. But the really conscious effort that we all have to make. This quest towards reparatory justice is not a future thing. We're negotiating for future things in quotation marks. But what we do now begins now. Mm-hmm. And how we see ourselves and how those changes occur begin now.
Madam Moderator.
That's what it is.
We may want to get a quick comment from Professor Sir Jeffrey Palmer, and then I see hand up from Top Class Entertainment. Professor, sir?
Well, thank you, Minister. Yeah, I think it is important that we do look, back in our past, but I'm very Jamaican. And I see, one of my great, I tell my students, one of my nightmares is if I wake up in the morning and somebody said in a dream that I wasn't born in Jamaica. So I see that Jamaica as a culture is very important. We've got an African link, these are our ancestors. And that could be part of the curriculum. But I think we must not forget Jamaica's history. Jamaica as a country that actually fought. And what I said to somebody when they said, you want a statue down? And I said, my ancestors looked at slave owners. So I can look at a piece of metal. And therefore, yes, we can go back and we should teach some of African history, but I would not want us to not give Jamaica's history a priority, because we are a country that the world admires. We are not what Hume said. We've proved that. So yes, please go back and look at the past and our links with Africa, etc. But I don't want us to make Jamaica's history something which is attack on, and to just deal with reparation. As I said before, we still have forces out there trying to stop us. And what we've got to do is to be able to deal with those people who want to stop reparation. And they're stopping it with historical dodges that we have to deal with. So yes, look at the past, but Jamaica is a country and it has a history, and we must not, in fact, lose that.
And Professor, you're well researched. You have been able to write, to do a lot, have a lot of writings, do a lot of writings about all the research you have done. And so it is important also for us to be knowledgeable about the past. Wouldn't you say that?
Oh yes, very much so, because, you know, when you look at the English or the British aspect of this, do you know, I was reading the other day and what Henry Dundas, the politician that attacked Haiti and that transported our maroons, do you know what his whole thesis of prolonging the slave trade was? That Jamaica did not have enough slaves in order that he could make more money. Jamaica was the focus of the argument of the slave trade, the focus. Now, we've got to teach that to our children. We must not, in fact, ignore that aspect, because I'm reading it in sort of primary documents. Primary documents. I can tell you what Henry Dundas said was that to prolong the slave trade, he told the British Parliament that the slavery in the Caribbean, and especially half of it is from Jamaica. I'll tell you the figures. Henry Dundas in 1795 said, we earn income from the Caribbean, 8,881,673 pounds. And the revenue to the British government, he said, was 1,624,176. That's the figures he used to say the slave trade should continue. I know that in Edinburgh, you should know that in Jamaica.
Thank you, Professor. Madam Moderator, could you take over Top Class Entertainment had hand up, and Professor Shepherd?
Yes, so I will take it in that order, Minister. Top Class and then Prof. Shepherd.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for hosting this awesome webinar on the social media platform, so that ones-on-ones like myself I'm all the way in Canada, and I want to just say thank you guys for this platform that we can be communicating and reaching out to our massive right across this world and across this globe, because as my grandmother would say, every nook and cranny, there's a Jamaican in there. Thank you, Miss Barbara. Thank you, Minister Grange. And I just wanted to add to what the young lady before myself, we're just in our 30s. I am just in my 30s. And just to say, education right now, as with everything that is going on, we would really like to delve more into ourselves, more into knowing ourselves, more into cultural things. As a Rastafari myself, I was not brought up Rastafari. I seek Rastafari on my own and find Rastafari. And the reason why I found it is because of the cultural benefit that Rastafari give to us young people, because it's either Rastafari or it is like you're on a derailed train. So I chose Rastafari as my way to seek some kind of repatriation. That was where my repatriation come in. So if I, as a young person, could have found this on my own or with my immediate circle then. We need to reach the other younger people that who are seeking for truth, who are confused and not knowing what to do after high school, after university, whether they want to go work or whether they want to go be an entrepreneur. We need to have more dialogues like this, and more into education, more into knowing our history as Jamaicans, as Africans. We need to delve more into our history and stop teaching and learning about the history of someone else's. I just want to say thank you for this platform. And I'm really hoping that we can do this more, whether it is on Sunday evenings or whatever. We have the time now. Everybody is home. Pandemic is across the world. And let's reach our people across the world and let's get us together and change the mind frame, retrain our mind frame so that we can be more adding to the benefit and the upbringing of our country, adding to the whole development of our country. I want to come home and add to my country and help with the development of our young people and their brains. So I'm here, I'm all 10 toes in, and I would love to work with the ministry, Miss Barbara Hanna, Miss Babsy Grange. As a Jamaican myself, I want to come home and work in my country, with my people. So thank you guys again. Thank you very much for this platform. Thank you, Miss Barbara. Thank you, Miss Babsy Grange. Thank you, speaker.
And you're so welcome. Thank you too. Professor Shepherd?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I want to congratulate you for the excellent role that you have played this afternoon. I want to congratulate our Honorable Minister and the National Council on Reparation and its sponsors and participants for hosting this webinar. It has been excellent. I just want to make 3 points. One, we can't destabilize lies if we don't know what the lies are. So I am not one who believes that we must eliminate all the textbooks that exist and only use one set of textbooks. I think that there are enough local textbooks. There are revisionist historians since 1948 and 1950. We have been training local historians. There are enough of us. There are tons of books out there, including textbooks for the schools, that would destabilize the kinds of narrative that won't bring honor to our people. We have written a more liberating narrative of self. We have written texts that tell us that our history did not start with slavery. So when I hear these things, I realize that there are people who don't know the history that the revisionist historians have written about and that the good teachers are teaching. So that's one. Second thing is that we are going to keep saying these things year after year after year, because Caribbean history is not compulsory in our schools beyond grade 9. Sorry, the third form. I don't know what the third form is. 7, 8, 9, grade 9, yes. So at grade 9, at age 13, if you stop doing history at age 13, you cannot know the kind of history that is necessary to build the case for reparation. It is our responsibility as educators, as activists, as advocates, to lobby for compulsory history education. There is a report which was done by CXC. It was commissioned by CXC to prove to our policymakers that they need to do something. History is dying in the schools, and it is dying at the University of the West Indies on all the campuses. We have to take action, otherwise we're going to be hearing the same thing over and over and over, that historians are not doing this, we are not writing the textbooks, only European history is there, and that is not true. It is not true. And the other thing I'd like to say is that we do have, and Jeff and I talk about this all the time, we do have the information we need to prove the case for reparation. And as in the case of Namibia, and I've been really talking with them about the plight of the Herero and Nama people and what has to be done. We have the information, we have the evidence, and the NCR is doing a wonderful job. collaborating sometimes with the Center for Reparation Research and the CARICOM Reparation Commission. In fact, the chair of the NCR is a member of the CARICOM Reparation Commission. So we do have the evidence. We have marshaled it. We have written. We just launched a fantastic collection on reparation, the Social and Economic Studies Special Issue. So the information is there, and we have marshaled it. It's just that, as I said, it's not, we have to find some creative dissemination strategies, and we have to lobby so that our children from the prep school coming right up study history. Social studies does not have enough history content, I can tell you, and civics has its role. But we talk about Garvey, we quote Nelson Mandela, we quote Maya Angelou, we quote Rex Stanford, all of whom tell us the importance of history. But we are going to be here again and again and again if we don't influence our policymakers. So thank you very much for this, and congratulations, everyone.
Thank you, Prof. And what Prof never said is that she's also a member of the National Council on Reparations. Yes, I heard a voice. Well, if there is now 7:41, Minister, if you are so minded, can we say thanks again to all those who have joined us on all these various platforms. This is the commencement of a series. We are having the conversations that we don't want to have, and we're having the conversations that we need to have. And these conversations are open, honest, and I really went through the chat, and I want to thank our participants for their honest comments and to say, look out, there's more coming. For next month, I know that we should be engaging with leaders on the continent in another webinar. And so you'll have that notice out in due time. So if I may say, stay tuned. Thank you very much. And over and out to you, Natasha. Thank you so much. And have a great week, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Blessings and love.
Blessings.
Thank you. Excellent webinar. Thank you.
Right.
So proud and happy to the fact that I was here. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you too for on behalf of the Inter-American Commission. And I forgot to mention that we have our own decade. It is 1 year beyond the United Nations one. Starts later and goes later.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank
Minister.
Yes?
Minister,
yes?
have no doubt. I will, as I said to you, I cannot say no to you. We go too far back in what we've done.
Tomorrow morning, if you hear a knock on your door tomorrow morning, you know who's knocking, right?
Yeah, but I'm committed to this. I'm committed to this.
Professor Taylor and Professor Palmer for agreeing to serve on the National Council for Reparation. And also, Natasha can remind me, or Lalita, or the other persons. Oh, Mr. McAlpin, Professor, right? He is also serving on the NCR, which is great. Huh?
Just some background noise, Minister.
So we really have boosted the team. Commissioner,
yes,
please, you know, we would like you to also be there for us to consult with you, right? We are going to pursue the 10-point plan. We are going to also review the 19 forms of reparations which came out of the Durban conference, and to see how we can achieve some of these things. Director, UNESCO, the work of UNESCO is still very important.
Thank you.
I'm very happy that you're in Jamaica with us.
Minister, you count on us. All of you count on UNESCO. Yes. We are absolutely committed with this, Minister. I won't repeat with everything that has been said, but we are committed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The webinar is going to be monthly, am I right?
Yes, yes, Minister.
Oh.
Absolutely, Minister. So stay tuned, everyone. You will see the flyer and the excitement and everything.
Thank you.
All right. Good night from
All right.
wherever you are. Good morning.
Sound.
Good
Thanks,
night,
everybody.
everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you so
Lovely
much.
meeting you all. Those I
Thank
don't
you
know,
too.
but lovely
Good
seeing
night.
those I know. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Good night.
Bye-bye. Good meeting. Good meeting from Toronto.
Oh, yeah.
Woo,
Yes, indeed.
Bye, Orlando.